We are live now. Good evening, everyone.
And no thanks to your new doohickey.
Now, thanks to my new doohickey, my new stream deck I'm trying out with the go live button that does nothing. Nothing. The goggles, they
Goggles.
do nothing. Hey, look, there's Wilson. Good evening, Wilson. How are you doing?
Hey.
How are you guys doing?
All righty. Not too bad. Another night here talking comics. Always fun. I think I'm going to start
Very
off by the show by mentioning somebody who died. Who it's amazing to me, somebody who died that I never heard of, who's been drawing comics for 20 years or something. Was it Lee Motter? You guys heard of him?
The name is familiar.
Yeah, it rings a bell.
He worked in the 90s. He worked through the 2010s. He was the co-creator of Stars and Stripe with who did it? Mark Waid. Pretty good artist. Modder, I think his name was. I'd have to check on that. But it's young. I think but I was just like, he hit. I saw it on Twitter that he died and a few other places, and I was like, it is amazing to me that someone can have a career in comics who I've never heard of. And he drew a lot of comics.
Okay, it looks like it was DC mostly.
Yeah, mostly DC.
Okay. I do recall the name. I do remember seeing the name before.
Yeah, I didn't read the Stargirl comic. I remember it from Young Justice, I guess.
Young Justice. Yeah, I don't think I've ever read anything in his stuff, but they showed some samples of his work, and I was like, hey, pretty good.
Because there were a couple of comics that were either spin-offs or lead-ins to Jeff Johns's JSA.
Okay.
But I didn't read them. I only read the main GSA title. Because I'm always going for the I was always going for the Super Team books because they had. Jared, what did you do? Stop touching the doohickey.
He's gone. Yeah. So you were saying.
No,
Once again, I was going for a comment and it kicked me out. Good evening, Tim. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Always when I move the mouse over to the comments, it kicks me out.
Yeah, I was always going for the Super Team comic because it had multiple superheroes instead of just one superhero. And multiple superheroes make everything better.
It's funny. That thought never struck me when I was a kid. I mean, I liked team books. I liked solo books, but I never bought a team book because there were more superheroes in it. And you're not the only one I've heard say that. I've heard other people say that they liked the team books because they got more superheroes. That's not an uncommon thought, but I just never thought that.
No, I tried to figure out why I like the Wildstorm universe so much, and the main reason I can explain it with is that the Wildstorm universe does not waste time with supporting characters and people's daily in their daily lives. It's just superheroes destroying stuff. I think it's honest.
And I have to say those early Wildstorm and I think Image in general books had a super team formula down. Because it used to be the super team formula was kind of 4 or 5 guys. You'd have the Fantastic Four. You'd have your strong guy, you'd have your leader, you'd have your ranged guy, and you'd have your useless woman. That was the super team formula. It's like if you look at all that early 90s stuff, they had a 7-person formula. Once again, you had your leader guy, you had your strong guy, you had to have 2 women, you had to have 2 flyers, and you had to have a telekinesis person. and like any of them could be ranged. You know, a certain number of them had to be ranged. Like, but your leader guy usually wasn't a ranged guy. He was just sort of an all rounder. Like Spartan on Wildcats was a good example. He wasn't the strongest guy. He was a Captain America type, not your strongest guy, not a guy with a lot of long range, but he's always a fighter and a good leader.
Yeah, but in Cyberforce, Heatwave was a ranged guy because he shot beams.
But was he the leader?
Yeah.
Okay.
The thing is, he was not the interesting character.
Right.
Even people thought that Stryker was the leader, but it wasn't. It was Heatwave.
Ah, okay. I don't remember, but it was like they usually had 7 guys. At least two of the 7 are women.
Well, I divide it in terms of personality because, of course, the thing about the strong guy, the strong guy's personality was always the strong guy.
Yeah.
But the rest wasn't because they had to have a loose cannon.
Right. There was you're right. One of the 7 is the hothead.
Yeah. In Wildcats it was Rifter, one of the subgenres. And in Cyberforce it was Ripclaw.
Yeah, the hothead. You need your Wolverine hothead. Mm-hmm. Good evening, Darren.
Good morning. Is that I heard you talking about the image, the first wave, kind of like
the early '90s super team formula was always like 7 team members.
Yeah,
2 of them had to be women, at least 2. Mm-hmm. There could be more, but I think there was usually 2.
Yeah, but one of them had powers, and the other one was a ninja.
Yeah, one of them could be the ranged person, and it's like out of the 7, like at least 3 of them have to fly because you need them up in the air.
And you mentioned the strong guy.
There's always a strong guy. There's always a leader. Yeah. There's always a hothead. I forgot him. There's usually a hothead.
A masked man or woman of mystery who's not quite.
That's just a little flavor. You don't need that. That's a little flavor. Right. Because you need because it used to be like the Fantastic Four was sort of the formula for years where there was the strong guy, the leader, the ranged guy, and the useless woman. That was your formula. One, and it didn't have to be a woman. One of the 4 was usually pretty useless. But then they kind of split up when because the 90s was about more, so they had like 7 guys. Like Fuji was the big strong guy on
Stormwatch.
Bastion was the leader guy.
It was so exciting, like when you're following team books like Marvel, like I mentioned Avengers or X-Men,
right,
where the corner box changed, reflecting a new character on the heads, and that was switched up, and it was like, oh my god, this is important. Like I remember late 80s, was it Dr. Druid? Is that his DRUID who joined the Avenger? I before that I had never seen this character ever. This is like
he didn't appear a whole lot.
He was not. He was he was who you got if you couldn't find Doctor Strange for some reason. He was like, well, we got this guy.
Right.
I think Roger Stern had a certain appreciation for those obscure type characters because he was also the one that brought back arrows from Jim Starlin's Captain Marvel, and renamed in Star Fox, and he also brought back She-Hulk when she had. After her title was canceled, and he used Dr. Druid, which is kind of funny. I've been looking over. I've had a chance to look over Dr. Druid's original appearances. So he appeared briefly in the Avengers storyline during that forgotten era where Shooter was writing and Colin was drawing.
Oh, that's when I stopped buying the Avengers.
Those were because Paris quits and the Avengers start becoming boring, and until Stern begins.
It's funny that you mentioned Star Fox. That was actually coincidentally the first issue I ever bought off of a spinner rack at a local magazine stand. I can know the date because it was 40 years ago. Like this year it was like spring '83, and I bought 3 comics that day. I bought Avengers. This was Star Fox. Like I think it was 232. It was X-Men 170. Paul Smith drawing it, and it was the final issue of Master of Kung Fu. But the Star Fox, again, would never have heard of that character. Just new to collecting comics. I knew Captain America. I knew Thor. I knew She-Hulk probably because she appeared in animated form on the Hulk cartoon in the early '80s. But that was my first time. I didn't know Hawkeye. I didn't know Wasp. I didn't know these characters.
Dr. Druid, I think I had a solo appearance of his in like Marvel Chillers or something from the 70s.
No, it was probably during when you were buying the Hulk.
No, he was definitely in a solo issue.
He was in
one of those 70s Marvel Spotlight books.
It was one of the horror reprint books.
Okay.
I always forget the name. It's the horror reprint books. I always forget the names.
Chamber of Chills and stuff like that.
Not Chamber of Chills. Let me check my.
But that was like the one solo Dr. Druid story.
Yeah.
Wonder Tales.
What was that?
Weird Wonder Tales.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one. Yeah.
But
those were not original stories.
Those were not what?
They were not original stories.
Oh, those were
they redrew. I think he appears in 6 stories. 5 of them are redrawn from Dr. Droom stories from Amazing Adventures back in the 60s. And the other one was some generic monster story, but they redrew the figure to make it Dr. Druid.
Okay.
I tell you, Paulo, your knowledge is amazing. I mean, that's the highest of compliments.
And no, it's weird, but this just popped into my head too, talking about the Avengers lineup. Before that, like, the Fantastic Four formula that which sort of popped up sometimes, and the Image team formula, there was often like really no formula in books like the Avengers, the JLA, the Defenders. Mm-hmm. The formula was, which characters are we allowed to use? Because it was kind of like, if they were allowed to use, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, they would, but then they wouldn't be allowed to use them because they're in someone else's continuity. So they'd throw in whatever characters they got. So there was often no formula for Avengers and JLA. It was just, you got 5 or 6 random characters thrown in there, and that
I think that the Avengers started having a defined formula when Cap, Thor, and Iron Man returned during the Kree Skrull War. Mm-hmm. And so we were already in 90-something territory. Because before that, there are all the characters that we are used to seeing as Avengers, but in the 60s, everything was still new. We look back and we don't recognize it as new. But
that's right. Cap's kooky quartet was formed in those original Avengers issues.
Yeah, and then the Black Panther joins, and we're used to seeing the Black Panther in the Avengers, but at the time, the Black Panther's in the Avengers. Looks like something big, and Hercules joins, and the Black Widow joins, but that's all kind of new. What happened in the 90s is that at the time the three original members are not on the team, and they all return at the same time because this is a big whopping storyline,
right?
That takes more than 2 issues to complete.
That was that. If there was any formula over the years for sort of the Avengers and the JLA, it was like, here come the big superheroes returning. There they go again.
Yeah. So you need there's kind of a formula. You need at least 2 of the big 3.
Right.
And one of them better be Captain America. It's not mandatory, but one of them better be Captain America, because otherwise you don't actually have the leader person down pat. You need because the stories are epic. You need the big inspiring figure. Mm-hmm. But if it's something big and epic that's going on, you need Thor. If you need the top brass to be involved in some kind of drama, you have Iron Man, so we can argue with Cap. Then you have you have a bunch of regulars that you can pick from, which are Hank and Janet, Vision, Wanda and Vision, and Hawkeye, and maybe Hercules, Black Knight, Black Widow, Wonder Man.
Well, I guess it was too, like in the early Wildstorm days.
Yeah.
Since they since everything was brand new, they didn't have casts of characters to pick from. They just had to go. They just had to come up with their 7 and go with them.
And they sort of, okay, so these are the X-Men. Let's have the X-Men stand-ins or Avengers stand-ins.
Right.
The remaining for the formula for the Avengers were whichever second-rate characters the writer likes.
Yeah.
Or if there are none, he creates his own.
Right. Because the second-rate characters are the ones you can do the characterization with.
Yeah.
That was my understanding with when in the 86, 87, all the DC relaunches, when they're relaunching Justice League, that they weren't going to allow them to have any of the big 3 of the Trinity, but they just begged to have at least, so they got Batman in there. But that was also my first time. I'd say, like, I even know, like, I'd never seen Blue Beetle before. I didn't know Blue Beetle, Booster Gold. Booster Gold was only around 3 or 4 years at that point. Like, in some of other, even Mr. Miracle, because I was new to comics, so I didn't know these characters. Like, Black Canary, didn't know Martian. I didn't even know Martian Manhunter. Like, why would I at the back of that at that time? It's like, he didn't appear in Super Friends. He didn't,
didn't know who he was.
So,
which is amazing for a character who was there since the beginning. Like, I didn't know he was a founding member of it, but as going around as formulas. I always was told by the older collectors that they liked buying the JLA or JSA because of all the superheroes in it, more bang for your buck. But I wasn't aware at that time. It's like they would have the cover is about them all together, but they never actually teamed up. They were never necessarily a team. They would all have their missions. So their books were individual stories, and I didn't know about that until a lot later.
That is why I never liked the JLA and why I did not like the Avengers Defenders War. If you remember, the Avengers Defenders War was from the early 70s, before my time. But I had heard about it, and in the mid to late 70s, I actually got some issues of it. And I was like, oh, cool, Avengers Defenders War. That sounds cool. Then I got to it, and for those of you who don't know, the Justice League of America formula was always, especially with their team-ups with the JSA, it wasn't one big adventure. It was they'd all get together in a room, and then, I don't know, Adam and Zatanna would go off on their mission. And you'd have an 8-page story about those two. And then you'd have an 8-page story about the Flash and the Golden Age Flash. And then, so it wasn't like and then they'd get back together at the end, and the problem would be solved. And not usually with a big exciting battle, but so it was always like that. The formula was always these two take on these two, and that's what the JLA event, the Defenders Avengers War was. It was like Iron Man and Wasp versus Hulk and I can't even remember and Nighthawk, all trying to get the evil eye or whatever it was. It was just always, there was always some task that they had to do that they weren't even really fighting. That the other two in the group were trying to stop them from completing that task. And I always did that for me.
I think that was Roy Thomas's idea. Because he was the DC guy at Marvel. Roy Thomas was always the DC guy.
Right.
And you'll notice that the JLA only becomes good in the late 70s when Len Wein is running it. Because when all the guys leave Marvel during the 70s, Englehart, Len Wein, Marv Wolfman, they're all Marvel. Jerry Conway, all of them are Marvel guys and start Marvelizing DC.
Yeah.
But at that time, I mean, Roy was writing everything that Stan didn't like, and that Stan couldn't, unless Roy didn't like it, and he would let Gary Friedrich write it.
The JLA got sent out in small groups of 2 instead of everybody working together, or at least getting in each other's way. Which I don't know, but that's it. It turned out to solo adventures of minor characters.
Did you think that was
with the Squadron Supreme storyline?
What was that, Paolo? You want to say that again?
Steve Englehart did the Avengers Defenders, wrote the Avengers Defenders War. He was still kind of new to writing.
Yeah. Okay.
And then he did that thing again, the trick again, with the Squadron Supreme storyline.
Right. And Darren, what did you say?
Do you think the subsets of characters are due to just giving the artists a break, or to be able to focus on those characters? Because you think of movies where they have on, like even the X-Men movies or Avengers, they'll have like, you know, subsets of teams within the movie, like the team gets split up so they can focus and give everyone their moments and stuff. Do you think it was because really this is an efficiency for the artist kind of thing, not to have to trust?
I don't think so. I think it was the writer. I think it's efficient. I think it's efficiency for the writer. I think that's how the writers liked to write those stories. It's much less complicated than trying to write a story about two groups of 7 heroes fighting each other. It's easier to break down the story because the story always broke down. There was one large task that had to go on. And then within that large task, there were 4 subtasks. And you sent you sent 2 guys out each to each subtask to try and get it done. And your guys failed at some subtasks and succeeded at others. And then at the end, everybody gets together to try and complete the task. And it's just a structure that's kind of easy.
I just had a flashback to the Legends of the Superheroes live action special from '79. Oh yeah, which I love. I'll go watch it regularly in pieces. I can only tolerate for so long, but I remember when those aired. But anyway, I digress. But that's so you think it's a writer-driven thing, not it's easier just to break it up into little I think
it's an easier way to write a story rather than like most Marvel stories weren't like that. But most Marvel stories had, the Fantastic Four had 4 characters. The Defenders usually had about 5. Once you get up to 7 on 7, that's 14 characters that you got. If there's 7 good guys and 7 bad guys, it's like, woo, that's tough to write a story. And like Marvel's would be, you'd be taking on, let's say like when I started, the Avengers were always taking on some big guy like Atuma. So it would be 5 or 6 Avengers versus Atuma and his minions. And Atuma was the Avengers would have to get through the cannon fodder. Or with Ultron, all the Avengers were taking on Ultron, who's invulnerable. I don't think Marvel ever took on as many at least the stuff I was reading, like the Defenders. Who are the Defenders taking on? The Headmen sometimes, but the Defenders were always fighting amongst themselves when I was reading them. So it was like Marvel would have a completely different formula than that. I don't think they had as big and unwieldy teams as the JSA and JLA. The only time they had big unwieldy teams was that Avengers Defenders War.
I never read that story. I don't know if they ever put that into trade. I didn't even know there was an Avengers Defenders War.
Yeah, I think that they have. I mean, over the last 20 years, they have. I don't think they had before then. But I remember seeing it came out in a recent trade. And by recent, I mean the last 20 years. And me saying, no, I don't want to buy it. Me feeling nostalgic for it and then going, no, I really don't want to read it.
I have such a hole in my memory of collecting comics and not realizing that I read a good chunk of the books that came out in the 60s, or at least the main core books. I have really little for the 70s, except for certain things here and there that I went searching for. So I knew just about what Spider-Man was doing in the 70s, but none of really the other superhero stuff.
That's because the 60s was the most reprinted period.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I read all my 60s stuff in reprints. But like I was lucky. I started in the mid and late 70s. 75 through 80 was my superhero period. But I was lucky enough to get a bunch of stuff from like the 5 years before that. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, they reprinted a lot of the 60s stuff. That's where I read that. But after like 1985, I read like very little Marvel and DC.
The Avengers Defenders would have been tough to reprint before trade paperbacks
Right.
because it's the crossover between two titles.
Yeah.
Right.
The big problem there's it is kind of the writing. I have a friend who really hates Steve Englehart, and I don't. But the Avengers Defenders War is when Englehart becomes a regular writer at Marvel. So it's one of his early pro works. You can tell that it's not very good. There's a lot of unnecessary dialogue, and I think that was Roy telling him that he needed more copy, because it kind of gets better, especially the way he handles characters. By the time we get to the Celestial Madonna storyline.
Yeah. And speaking of old Avengers, a facsimile came out this week.
Oh, nice.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Avengers number, what is this, 8? Right, yeah. Kang.
I love those. I mean, it's a page for page reprint, right?
Yeah, I'm enjoying them thoroughly. Ooh, look at that Marvel ad.
I love it. Yeah.
When I read that Kang's first appearance for the first time, it was like it didn't seem that impressive, and even the Avengers, they show up to the scene and look, he's floating in an invisible sofa.
Nah.
And they're like, "Ooh, technology!" You know what?
Even though it's nothing like the inside, I like the visualization of Kang's force field on the cover. I just think that's pretty cool. Those like glowing spheres or whatever they are. On the inside, it's never like that. It's just an invisible dotted line. Because who wants to draw those all the time?
Uh-huh.
I don't think Kirby would mind.
I think it's great that Marvel and DC do these. Like I have a handful of them. I have like from DC. I have what's that Neil Adams issue that they reprinted? The Batman. It's that with the over the castle. It's like a Bob Kane homage.
Oh, the
cover.
Spooky cover with
yeah.
And
then maybe they did a reprint. This has been reprinted over the years, but I know that the Green Arrow, Green Lantern, very well known, where he's shooting through the.
I have a whole short box full of reprints now. Of between the dollar reprints Marvel used to do and the facsimile editions. I just got a ton of those reprints. I enjoy them. I especially liked the dollar ones because they were cheap and not precious.
Were those the milestone ones they did like in the early 90s?
No, those are the True Believers.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah.
I don't know if you mean they're putting them out from like 2015 to 2020 maybe. They just for whatever push they had that month, that whatever crossover they had, they'd publish some early issues tied into it for $1.
I'd be curious to know what I'd be curious to know what the economics is on the inside of that. Of like, okay, you already have the material, it's
right,
and blah blah blah, and then whatever the royalty structure is, if there is one.
It's all stuff that's already been done in Masterworks, I think.
Yeah.
So all you got to do is send the PDF to the printer.
Yeah, I mean the actual production work, and guys, well, way more than I do about the production work on this stuff, but like it's minimal at best, right? Yeah.
Right, minimal production work. No, it's an easy task, I think.
Yeah,
so
something that can be put together in a few hours and then sent via FTP or whatever they're using.
Right.
Yeah, so that part, but in terms of like the cover price is like as $1, right? So you do the math backwards. You go, okay, retailers are spending 50 cents, and then distributors spending 5 or 10 cents less than that. So then you get into like, it might be just be a wash. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be, but I doubt it. But they stopped doing them, so it might be that they said, there's not enough money in this for us to bother. But they're doing the $4 facsimiles too. So I'm guessing that they were like, you know what? Why bother with the dollar ones when we put out? But they're putting out so many fewer of the facsimiles. So I don't know.
They determine wherever the math is, or maybe they just like, you know what? Why don't we just do it when it's really warranted? Like if we have an Ant-Man movie coming out with Kang's in it, we should do that.
Like it was always tied into whatever crossover they had going on too. Like if they were getting like what I don't know, some crossover with when they first got Conan back. They did some True Believers with old Conan stuff,
like the Barry Windsor Smith stuff.
Barry Windsor, the one Neil Adams Conan issue 39 or something, or else when they had whatever they had that year's crossover built around, it was usually something in the past with some trigger point, and they put out the dollar books. You know, in some months they'd put out $4 or $5 books. So there was a few of them.
Yeah, I think the facsimiles are smart. Like, if you have holes in your collection, you want the actual. Because I've bought some of them for that very reason. Like, including for the painful, I always talk about is the New Mutants '98 that I used to have 20 copies of back in the day, and just to have like that, the sequential, numerology in your collection.
Yeah. They put out Hulk 180, 181, and 182 in facsimile editions. So it's like, all right,
very smart. Yeah. Actually, in '86, that was when I first started collecting. There was it was called The Incredible Hulk and Wolverine. It was a reprint of 180, 181 with some extra material in the back of it. This is like summer of '86. I remember because that's when I first started collecting, and it had a write up in the back about like the origin of like the claws, and like at first they wanted to be not in him, like telescopic, kind of just like accessories and kind of how it evolved, but. I don't think I was understanding at the time it was reprint. Just like when I was buying Marvel Tales back then, and I knew it seemed kind of quaint, maybe is the word. I don't know, but it seemed older stuff, but like they're simpler. But I wasn't really. I don't know if I was understanding it was reprints at first.
Yeah, I think Wizard did a reprint too in the '90s, late '90s, of Hulk 180, 181, and 182. With like an acetate cover too. I think I have that somewhere in my acetate cover tour. It was like a die cut acetate or something.
Like how the Marvels covers were in '94, like the acetate, like an overlay kind of.
Yeah. Except I think I vaguely remember because I have it somewhere. I would just pick them up around all those Wizard editions. Mm-hmm. They'd send a bunch of them to Marvel, like all the Wizard 1/2s.
Right.
And I just kind of pick them up and bring them home. There were certain things when I was at Marvel that I collected just because they were around the office.
Sure.
And that was one of them. I would collect the Wizard 1/2s just because they were right there.
Yeah.
Hey, that was like I think we talked about it, but like back in my internship days in '93, '94, those summers, that was the maximum output of the company, including all that Marvel UK stuff. So there was a lot of Death's Head sitting around the office, like
no one wanted that Marvel.
Right.
No one wanted it. It was all in the overflow boxes.
What they should have sent you was Doctor Who magazine. Then you guys would want to collect. Because Marvel UK had a bunch of BBC TV properties that they put out, either a regular comic or a special comic once a year or something. But those nobody thinks of those as real comics.
Yeah. Oof. Marvel UK.
They did a original real Ghostbusters comics based on the Ghostbusters cartoon.
There was oh my God, it just made me flash back to, I think I started doing videos on YouTube in like 2013 or 2014. Right around there. And there was a guy who used to do videos who was like a Death's Head fan. He would always show off the Death's Head comics he got. And I was like, there's a Death's Head fan out there? Who knew?
I feel like it's just like someone who, like, I feel like every band that exists on planet Earth, there is a person that's their favorite band.
Yeah.
You know, like, how is that your favorite band? But like, it's
just their favorite band.
I got copies of Death's Heads in my collection. Well, I have boxes that have Death's Heads in it, not necessarily part of the collection.
You've accumulated some Death Heads comics.
Yeah, but I do recall reading them. I couldn't tell you a single story about them.
I wish Jared would join the Fossils one night. I don't know if I hate modern comics enough to join the Fossils.
Let's give the
I
Fossils
buy
some
too
love.
many new comics.
What is that about?
Yeah,
They just like kind of like it's back in my day. This is the better stuff. Is that the Fossils is about?
No, the Fossils is our Wednesday night show.
Hallows on them.
Yeah, I'm the youngest member.
It's good. You're a
He's
junior
a
member
kid.
of the Fossils.
And while the other guys all go through their collections to get out all the RV comics to show off, I go to bidetech.com and get images of French comics that nobody's ever heard of in the US, and I talk about them.
Harvey Comics. Yep, Howlin' Mouse is on along with Paolo. Yep,
Occasionally when
him
he gets
on
home from work early.
That I tell you that Harvey stuff, like when I started to collect like '86, like that was I think I might mention it. The comic store I went to, like I didn't know that continuity as a company existed. They just they just didn't carry continuity. Maybe their distributor didn't carry them forever. I didn't know those.
Neil Adams continuity.
Yeah, like that stuff.
Okay.
So like what was continuity was putting out stuff like in the mid '80s still, right? Or maybe even farther, like his own stuff.
I think they had two periods. They were like the early '80s to the mid '80s, and then they were like back in the early '90s, and I missed them completely in the '90s.
Who can blame them? Because everyone was trying to. If they went away, they're trying to come back to get some of that early '90s money. I'm trying to think. There's a couple companies. It wasn't Comica. It wasn't first. There were some companies that kind of made a little bit of a comeback, trying to capitalize on that little bubble time. But I love those companies like Comico and First and Eclipse and Eternity. And all those.
I bought all that stuff in the '80s.
Yeah, I got
First went out of business in '91, so they kind of missed out on the on any push from the Image launch.
Yeah.
Well, Jared, the stuff that like Image puts out now, and suddenly a lot of the indies that you buy, does it remind you of that era of the mid '80s, like from like Eternity Eclipse, like that kind of like
No, not at all. This is a completely different era. From like 2012 on, has been a completely different indie era than anything that came before it.
And the difference to you is I'm not trying to deflate this. I'm just saying in terms of like thinking outside the box in terms of content. To now it's just way even more bold in terms of
it's way. I would say it's hard to describe. 80s indie comics were kind of smaller than today's indie comics in terms of if you were making an 80s indie comic, it was because you loved comics. And a lot of them were genre comics, and you were trying to make a successful comic, except for the black and white boom, which was its own separate thing. The black and white boom was kind of do-it-yourself punk rock. Hey, I can make a comic. So all of a sudden, people, just about people were like, "Oh, I can make a comic." Which is why so many of them were crap, but that was okay. It was just like, I can make a comic, so I'm gonna. And so many like bad black and white comics were out during that boom, but that's what made it so unique. Is that
I have a lot of them.
Yeah.
There's kind of a charm to it. Yeah.
Someone in Iowa, all of us who, is nowhere near New York or LA and any place that does the big creative stuff in our culture, all of a sudden said, hey, I can make a comic. And they did. So that's what made the black and white boom so unique. Outside of that was kind of like, hey, let's get away from Marvel and DC and make our own comics. And we can try to control things and have a successful comic and make a living. And a lot of it was prose or guys it wasn't amateur like the black and white boom was. Meanwhile, I count sort of the modern indie era as Saga #1 being the beginning of it, which is just a tremendously successful comic. Even though Walking Dead, Walking Dead was just such an outlier.
Mm-hmm.
But like when Saga came out, even though there was other stuff before it, that it was all of a sudden like we can be big in indie comics, and it can be a TV show. It doesn't just have a comic can be bigger than a comic, even. Like in the 80s when you were making a comic, it was a comic. You had
you knew
no
there was
delusion,
no
of
chance.
grandeur.
Yeah,
You wanted success in comics. 2012 on, you wanted success in comics, sure, but that was just one notch in your
you want an
empire
option.
belt.
Yeah, you're going for, and there's also a very healthy, at least there has been, trade market. So you have that in terms of collections, then you have your, of course, whoever wants to go for is, I'm going to have a Netflix series made on my comic kind of thing.
Right,
but,
right. There's so many paths to, even though it's all long shots. I
mean. Do you remember in the late 80s or 99, there was a John Sable TV show?
Oh yeah.
Like
you can find it on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, I knew of the comic. I knew it was a little bit of a hot comic, not terribly, but it had some heat. But I remember being stunned seeing that was going to be a TV show, because who would know this, right? I was stunned when Turtles was a cartoon, because that was out for 2 or 3 years as this kind of gritty, very niche inside baseball kind of comic where no one else who in the world would have heard of this.
No, when I started reading primarily in English, and I bought a couple of Wizards, I was very, very surprised to see a bunch of cartoons were actually indie comics.
Yeah.
Not only the Turtles. We had Turtles comics here, but they were the Archie stuff.
Right.
But there was the Turtles. Fish Police had a
I was going to mention
cartoon.
Fish Police, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Cadillacs and Dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the other one? There was another big one that was kind of out of the ordinary, but there was also the Mask, because the movie they made they made a cartoon
one.
And I think there were a couple other ones I can't remember right now. They tried a Bucky O'Hare cartoon, didn't they?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I've had a pull list since I was 16 years old, and before that, I went to the newsstand every week. So I've basically had a pull list since I was 10. So I do appreciate modern. It was all modern when I bought it. Hated black and white comics during the boom, but have grown to appreciate and like them into my 50s for whatever. There were a lot. If you were a superhero guy in the mid 80s, you're not going to like the black and white boom, because it was so different than Marvel and DC comics. And I'm not going to tell you there was a lot of crap out there, but it was just different.
The book I always bring up where you mentioned when there was a couple maybe kids in Iowa or something make a comic. There was a book I picked up called Synthetic Assassin. It was 87, right? And you could read in the back, it was the art was decent enough for what it was, but it was 2 15-year-olds who got someone had maybe an uncle who bankrolled them, and they put out a few issues, but some of it you could tell was them drawing out with a couple of Frank Miller swipes, and they were pretty obvious from Dark Knight. But I was I was that age when I'm picking that up, so I was wow, these kids can do it. But that was the kind of stuff that was out there in droves, right?
I think cartoonist kayfabe has done a good job sort of popularizing those comics from the 80s, the black and white.
They go through long boxes of that stuff.
Just by labeling them too outlaw comics.
That's right.
That's kind of what they call them, outlaw, because they were outside if some guy in Idaho decided he wanted to put out a comic, he could. That was the first time ever that could happen.
Yeah, distribution is amazing.
All of a sudden. So
I think they do a great job with the black and whites. I think for Outlaw, they Tim Vigil always comes to mind. The Grips, and then Faust is the artist that this is the guy who gritty, doesn't give a shit. This is what I do.
I think cartoonist kayfabe really has popularized a lot of those outlaw comics from the 80s, just because people now are, they see their enthusiasm for them, and it's infectious.
They have a vibe, which is like when teenagers start listening to metal, and now they're too cool for pop, and that's kind of their choice of comics. Because I don't think they would do a video on E-Man or Mystery.
No, I think they're. I don't think. Yeah, I think they. You're right. They're not edgy enough, kind of like thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember Warlock 5?
Yes, that was one of the Carousel.
Yeah. So I have a collection of it behind me that came out a few years ago, right? And so my interest in it is, and you know me, I love like airbrush art from the 80s, right? So the covers were, I think Denis Bouvet, he did the second Alien miniseries, very airbrush, very pop, very like bold colors, right? Chiaroscuro, if I can use the word. But so the reprint of the Warlock 5 stuff has the covers, but it's completely in black and white. I'm like, this defeats the purpose. I guess they didn't have the budget like on the signatures to do any color at all and anywhere. Okay. But I was like so disappointed because I was like, this is why I bought the thing, because I wanted repros of those covers, which I was so like fascinated with back then. Wow. But okay. But Airsil, that's who put out at least the first couple issues of Adventurers, which I always talk about, that Tolkien D&D style sword sorcery book that the guy Peter Shue illustrated with ink wash and stuff. That was one of the hot books during the 80s black and white boom.
I think the Sleepy Reader hit on something here too that might be the turning point in 2012. Was before Saga, it seemed like many indie comics were tryouts for getting a job at Marvel and DC. Well, after Saga, you used your Marvel and DC sort of cachet with fans to launch your own indie comic and hopefully make some money.
But the reason why everybody was trying to do that was because Bendis and David Mack got jobs at Marvel doing Daredevil.
Right.
And everybody thought, man, if I do something cool, Quesada will like me.
Right.
He'll hire me.
And then I think with Saga, it reversed. It became, if I've made my, if I can get something at Marvel and DC, I can now parlay that into my own indie comic and making a ton of money. Like I remember reading when Saga came back, they mentioned like Saga was gone for a couple of years and came back just last year, I think. And in one of the first issues, it said something like they sold, I forget the number, 7 million trade paperbacks worldwide, some astoundingly large number that made me go, whoa.
Yeah.
And man,
and so he was that right before that was Hughes ending his Y the Last Man run, and that's what is that the Vaughn like chronology?
Well, I think Y the Last Man was even long before that. Well, but he was well established by then. Yeah. And also I think Saga to me represents because I always had I had this realization once. It was when I read probably about 15 years ago, maybe a little more. They started putting out a bunch of collected editions of stuff from just random stuff. Some I think Fantagraphics started publishing some old Ditko stuff. Some other company was publishing pre-code horror stuff. And it's the first time I got to read any of that. Because besides like EC Comics, I never read any like random pre-code horror from all the other companies. And in reading that, I came to the realization that censorship, the censored mind is different than the uncensored mind when it comes to writing. If you read that like pre-code stuff just happened. Like there was one story where this is the one that always sticks out to me. It was a story of this rich this rich guy who didn't like his children were all spoiled. So his children were just waiting for him to die so they could inherit his money. And they were all spoiled rich people. And then so this little 8-page story was him setting these, traps, tests for them. And if they passed the test, they'd get the money. If not, they'd die. And they all died. And then the old man died. And there was no lesson learned. There was no nothing. There was just this horror story about horrible things happening. And it's like every horror story I ever learned was a code horror story where a lesson was learned and no one was hurt. Or if they hurt, they learned it was the bad person who was hurt and the other people learned a lesson from it. And then if you read stuff that wasn't code approved, a lot of it had to do with showing you stuff that wasn't allowed in the code. So it was kind of like it was like, haha, we're not allowed to do this, so we're gonna do this. So even though it wasn't under the code, it was still affected by the code because they wanted to do the stuff they didn't do in the code. And I think it took till like 2012, and Saga really strikes me as Saga has casual nudity in it. Saga has like casual sex in it. And I've often heard people say, oh, Saga's always looking to shock. And I'm like, I don't think they are. I don't think it's shocking at all. I think it's just they're post-code now where casual nudity is, it doesn't occur to them that they can't do nudity in their old. There are more penises in the books I read than you can imagine, because now when a guy has to be naked, they just show him naked. Like there's one this was really funny though. I found this strange. What was I reading? All Against All. This is one of my aliens of experimenting on humans, and we came to this one panel, and these aliens, humans have been dead. They came back and they used genetic banks to bring the humans back. And I was just, and we got to this one panel where he's experimenting on the human, and his package is covered up. And the first thing that went in my head was, why would aliens cover up his package? That makes no sense. But then later on in the book, he breaks out from that. Where is it? And he's naked, and they just draw him naked. They don't cover him up. They don't do anything. And that's what you see in indie comics these days. And it's not shocking, even though I don't know why. I guess they didn't want it to be too shocking in the beginning. And I think Saga started, well, we don't do this stuff to be shocking. We just do this stuff because we want to do this stuff. So it's like, I think with Saga 2, indie comics became uncensored to an extent, which I think was a turning point in, like, because the Comics Code had been gone for a decade.
Right.
But still the Comics Code influenced people who worked under the Comics Code. But, 10, 12 years later, all of a sudden you got people working who don't know what the Comics Code was, so it can't affect them. So it's like,
I think there's probably a parallel with Peak TV also, a lot of what's been going on in HBO and everywhere else.
Yeah, probably a parallel. It took a while for minds to be uncensored.
Yeah. But it's interesting you talked about, like Bendis, what was his book before he went kind of mainstream? What was that book he had?
Powers?
He had
Powers,
Powers was kind of around the same time or a little bit after. He came from the graphic novels he did at Caliber Press, because they were reprinted by Image around the time that he started doing Ultimate Spider-Man.
But Jared, right, and Jared and Wilson will remember that, in mid 2000s. I'm Pal, you know this too. But when we were actually at Marvel, right, this was, I guess, what kicked us off. What I was about to say is these outside of comics but well-known writers who are fans of comics. So first at DC with Brad Meltzer, Identity Crisis. That's the one I think about, right? But then in quick succession in Marvel, you had Reggie Hudlin come in from movies and TV writing and directing, and I'm trying to think of Walter Mosley, and I'm trying to think there was this kind of some stage Brad writers. Meltzer? There were some stage writers, but there was, I think I know a couple of the individuals at Marvel when we were there in the mid 2000s who were responsible for kind of recruiting
Right.
And
And
well, even Stephen King, right? Like, that was the Dark Tower.
in the early 2000s, there was definitely a push at Marvel to get TV and novel and writers at writing.
Right,
comics.
Straczynski, right? So
Yeah. Good point, Paolo, about Bendis. That was probably a point where indies looked good as a job tryout. Yeah, followed by Fraction and the rest. Yeah. Captain Kirk would be great for a Saga universe.
But Straczynski kind of started. But Straczynski was the guy that was used to doing science fiction, and at the time he had just come off of Babylon 5. He was used to doing science fiction and soap operas. Yeah, I have Murder She Wrote on reruns during daytime TV over here, and I stopped counting the amount of times I saw Straczynski's name in there.
Yeah, Murder She Wrote.
Yeah, wow. But I think Straczynski was the only one that's good enough, because a lot of the TV people, they can't seem to get their mind out of the budget.
Yeah,
there's no budget. You can come up with anything. The other thing is that since TV writers, the same as movie writers, what they end up writing is the dialogue. They don't describe scenes.
Right.
They're not good at coming up with good visuals for the artist to interpret. So if the artist himself is not a good visual storyteller, you end up with something that looks bland.
Yeah, because the TV writers do not know how to think panels. They do not know how to think in single images. I again, working in the industry for so long, I've talked to many artists who'll be working on a project and be, Heroes had a couple of comic books. And you figured, since the TV show was about comics, but in live action, the comic book should be easy to do. And those guys had no idea how to write a single individual panel and what is happening in a panel. It's like a panel is a snapshot of time. Time's not moving. And they would write stuff as like, how do you expect this character to jump over the couch, jump out the window, and land on a motorcycle when you're saying that's panel 1? That doesn't exist. And those books end up being, the people who worked on those books, they were almost going insane because of the writers did not know how to write a single comic book. And I've read into that so many times when someone's like, here's, I've known enough directors to go, I'm going to make a comic book, and then now I have something to physically show off. And it's like, it's a great concept, but you're not going to get a script this thick into a 22-page comic book.
And that's what I'm trying to do, action, because when they're not doing action, it's talking heads. Talking heads.
A lot of talking heads. And then still not enough room for the dialogue.
I think the novelists are better at coming up, because there were, especially back in the Golden Age, because all those guys wrote pulps. So I think they have a better concept of the passage of time, not having to be that linear at the same speed, because in a novel, in prose story, you can spend some time describing the environment, and it doesn't affect the storytelling experience, and the dialogue isn't that important. There are writers who can write an entire page with no dialogue just because they like their own description so much. But if a novelist writes a comic like that, it gives the artist more room for interpretation, instead of trying to cram all the talking heads into a single panel and the action. You can describe, since you're describing the action in prose, the artist will have an idea on how to use specific moments that they can use in a sequence of panels.
So God's Hank here. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Paolo.
I'm trying to remember when was it that prose writers stopped trying to work in comics, because
Well, I'm glad you said that because God Tank here mentioned Captain Kirk, which reminded me of Shatner, and I remember that line of books, Tech World, and it was comics too. Like I'm sure those are all ghost written, don't you think?
Yeah.
I've done work with William Shatner, so I can't neither confirm or deny any of that. But that stuff had. Actually, I don't know where I was going to go with that one because it was basically.
You don't want to talk about it.
No, it's not that. I had a great time working on those projects because I've worked on Tech War, or not Tech War, Man of War, which was another that had nothing to do with Tech War. It was just like he likes using the war in the books. That there are things where adapting a storyline, and again, it's the whole concept of adapting it in one format to be able to like branch it off into many different things. So you have the scripts that I saw were at least someone was reading the books and then adapting it to be done correctly for the comic books. And Tech War worked because that was being done through Marvel. So you have somebody overseeing that type of thing where you have someone, most of the stuff that was adapted from television or movies, there was always a Marvel editor kind of working on that. I think Ralph used to do a lot of those adaptations of books, because he knew how to speak the language of comic books. And I don't think you had many writers doing that until more recently.
Yeah. Doing dialogue right requires an artist to use interesting angles in which dialogue is veiled in an interesting way. Not all artists can do it. Just talking heads? Yeah, boy. It's that, and, there are comics, indie comics, that are entirely based on people talking, real life stuff. And so those guys do it full time. So it's different when a superhero guy does it or an adventure guy does it when they're not used to it. And also the writer has to put that dialogue in an interesting scene. If he puts it in a noir diner maybe, or something where there's lots of shadows and light and interesting setting going on, it's a lot easier than if it's in an office, two people in the kitchen talking. That's a little harder.
Mm-hmm.
But who just jumped into my head? Clive Barker. He had his own universe with Marvel too, didn't he?
Yeah, the Hellraiser. Was it an actual universe or just some?
It was called the Barkerverse. He had a bunch of
books. It was
books.
called the Barkerverse, and there was about 3 or 4 books, 3 or 4 stories in there.
Razorline.
Razorline.
Oh,
Marcus
right, yeah.
McLaurin edited them, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
A few years earlier, though, it was the adaptation of like Hellraiser. I remember,
but that's how it's
nice, really good.
That's how, yeah.
Clive Barker must have been a comic book fan, because I think he was involved with the line too. Mm-hmm. He didn't just lend his name to it or whatever. He was interested in it. Not that I ever read any of the Barkerverse, but
a friend of mine had one of the. Can't remember which one. Can't remember. Saint Hokum and X, I think, number 1.
It was Hokum and X, Saint Sinner,
Ecto Kid.
Ecto Kid was another one.
And
I have zero idea what they're about. I think
that was like Steve Skroth's first comics.
And this was also during peak Marvel output, like around 93, right? I think that's
it may have been right after it. I can't remember.
Really?
It was.
You know what I meant to mention in the honor? I'm sorry to pivot, but in the honor of the Super Bowl, do you want to talk about NFL Super Pro?
NFL Super Pro?
And maybe Kickers Incorporated, one of the New Universe books. Remember, he was a professional football player, gets superpowers.
All I know about is NFL Super Pro is it got, who was it, Fabian to the Super Bowl, so he was happy.
That sounds familiar. And Joe Jusko did the cover, so
yeah. It was goofy licensed book. I think Barry Dutter had something to do with it too, because he always mentions that when he finds copies.
That's right. I remember seeing that. Yeah. So sorry, I didn't mean to get off of the more cerebral stuff, but like,
I don't know how cerebral the Barkerverse was. Yeah. I really can't tell you because what was the name of that movie? Nightbreed.
Nightbreed.
Yeah.
My friend Rob is still disappointed by that movie because the poster had all these interesting characters and stuff on it, and they were not in the movie till like the last 3 minutes.
The Hellraiser and Nightbreed comics were still published by Epic around 1990.
Okay.
There was something else. What was it called?
Hyperkind, Holcomb and Heck.
Yeah, that was the
yeah. Ecto Kid Razor line, or they was called Razor.
Yeah.
Then
Does
you
it
had
say
books on the rep.
Does it say what years they were out?
Let's see.
93, 94, I think. I think they were a response to Vertigo.
Razor line, the first cut, September 1993.
Okay. So it was just kind of
right in there.
Yeah, right. Is that the good time or the bad? I think that was the time there was a glut of stuff, but I don't know how well any of it was selling.
It was for me, it was a good time. It was coming in. What I would say was it was showing up right after a really big party. The music's still playing quite well. There's still a lot of food all over the place. You know, everyone's happy and all that. Not knowing
a lot of drunk people
knocked out, huh?
So a lot of drunk people around.
A lot of drunk people, but everyone's having a good time, not knowing that the police are about to knock the door in and arrest everybody there. So he also has a set of Epic comics under his name with Nightbreed, Hellraiser, Weave World, Pinhead, Books of the Damned. So these all were just looks like it was all part of the Hellraiser portion of it.
Yeah. I remember with Epic they changed their logo. I don't know why this stood out to me, but like I actually that Epic E they would have on everything for like in the 80s. I think they just tried the 90s grunge it up a bit to make it like
it was the heavy hitters line.
Yeah, it was like they wanted that like the E was like, I think more like it looked like that Batik regular like that typewriter font, kind of like that, and to try to like grunge it up a bit.
I think there was no consistent Epic design because all of the Epic comics they kept the same corner box throughout their life. Even if new corner box designs were introduced on later Epic comics. So by the time the Heavy Hitters line came around, they had nothing to do with the other Epics. I'm not even sure how the comic shops would display them, if they were putting all the Epics near the Marvels, or they just put them with the indies.
Yeah, what happened too was, by the boom times of the 90s, the Marvel logo meant everything, and the Epic logo meant nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Epic branding was kind of gone. And so they tried to figure out how to brand Epic more Marvel so it would sell better. Didn't the Wachowskis work on Ecto Kid before they ever got to the Matrix as 62 Lefty Blues?
Yes.
Yeah.
Starting with issue 3, which also makes sense with Steve Scroach doing so many of their stuff later.
Yeah.
So that's where the connection was. And then, you had Mark McCullough was there. You also had his assistant was
Spencer Lamb has worked with them on a lot of stuff.
Right. So Spencer went on to become the editor of all those books.
Right.
That were done with Scousies. So that was their introduction, I think, into comics, or at least that I'm aware of.
Right.
So,
I know they have some connections to like Spencer. I know edited a lot of stuff for them in the 90s.
Yes.
And James Robinson did one of the comics. I think it was one of the first things that Robinson did professionally.
Spencer sent me that. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. There was a Matrix. They collected all the 90s Matrix comics in this hardcover. And I think I did a video on it. It was really good. I mean, they had talent working on that book.
Yeah.
And it was just a series of Matrix stories, like stuff in the Matrix universe, kind of.
Yeah, I remember him telling me about he came in one day to visit. This is way after everybody, after that office was let go. And he would still come in and visit. And I remember it was like, so what are you working on now? And it's like, oh, this is this concept project called The Matrix. And, when he, lack of a better term, pitched it to me, completely different than what eventually came out. The bones were there, but the concept was for a while to have two different actors playing Neo. One that's actually in the Matrix, and then one when he's awake, because he would be, and they were going to have two different actors. It was going to be Will Smith and I believe Keanu. They were both going to be in the Matrix, and one was awake and one's asleep. So it was like how you perceived yourself in the real world compared to what you thought you looked like. So that was like some of the original concepts were that.
One should have been like Will Smith, and the other should have been like Joe Pesci. You wake up in the real world. Joe Pesci.
But I guess they just didn't want to like double everybody, because at that point you would have had to have two actors for every character that was in and out of the Matrix.
It was pretty high concept for a general audience. I mean, people did get it. That's why I think that's one of the reasons why it did so well. But aside from like kind of the bullet time effects that no one's seen before, but like I think that was the right move, that they kept that part of it simple enough. They talk about in the movie residual self-image. So you have your hair in like he has his hair in the Matrix, like he does in
Tit goblins. I always see the Baker verse in the dollar bins and put them back. I've done it a good half dozen times. Well, I always used to see the Barker verse, lying around Marvel, and I wouldn't even take them for free. So I know how you feel. I've never read them.
What would Tit Goblin pay?
Ever. I wouldn't know.
Well, what a dollar been fine? Okay, what would you pay? 50 cents? Would you pay quarters? Would you pay? They have to pay you to take them. That's one of those.
They'd have to pay me to take them.
Yeah.
I mean, I just have no interest in them. That's all it is.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
I understand Ecto Kid was pretty desired for a while, but that might be just because that was the more popular of them, and I think it was because so many creators, that was their beginning books, and they thought to do a lot after that. So I think that might have been why, but who knows? I could not recall any of the stories. I know I have a few of them. And a friend of mine wrote Hokum and Heck, but I never read those issues.
I've just never seen it. The only Clive Barker movie I've seen is Nightbreed. And I saw that with my friend Rob, who complained about it when it came out. I don't remember it. It was that, and I've never seen Hellraiser. So I've just never been into sort of the Clive Barker thing, the Barkerverse. So
I watched a lot of the Hellraiser stuff, but it's like it was always interesting and odd, but it was part of horror. Horror is not my thing. I think I watched them only because of the fact that there was comic book adaptations of it. So the mystery of the box was always interesting in itself, not the outcome and what was going on with the Cenobites characters and all that stuff. With that body horror stuff was never for me. But it was always the mystery of the box and how people are connected to it. I found that to be interesting enough to keep watching them.
I always thought the visuals from Hellraiser were cool. That box was cool, and the Pinhead visuals.
Yeah, it's cool characters. Yes. I was trying to remember, remember how hot the Vampire Lestat stuff was in the early 90s, before the movie even. There was, who was putting out those comics? This is even before the movie.
Like Innovation or something?
Yeah, it might have been Innovation.
I think it was Innovation.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you remember Marvel putting out like a paper fold up of the Hellraiser box?
Yes, I have one of those. I still have the paper. They printed on the regular comic book paper that we draw on. They were printed on that, and it was like, if I remember correctly, like the back of them still had all the lines and stuff like that. But I have one around here somewhere. I have to dig up. Because I know I have at least one of them.
62 Lefty Blues. I read Barker's short story fiction, but the comics didn't work as good as my imagination. Yeah. Jeff Darrow did some pretty good work on the Matrix. Yeah, that Matrix hardcover collection I have is full of good work. It really surprised me how good it was. Just I
have a question for you guys about the early 90s. So Image starts, and everyone, there's that gold rush for artists really, because it was very artist driven at the time to go
Right.
to Image and make their money. Like you have the second wave of guys who go there, like Keown and you
Mhm.
know, and those guys. So then you have like Dark Horse. Did they have? What was it? Was it Bravura? Was that was another imprint? You had these imprints. These
They
creator
had their-
Hero
imprints.
They
was
had their
Malibu.
hero line, a $1 hero line.
But
These
Bravura
other-
was Malibu, and it was kind of funny
Right.
because it was for all the industry veterans.
right.
Starlin, Gil Kane, they all had stuff
Simonson
at
maybe was over
Chaikin.
there.
Yeah, Chaikin. They all had stuff at Bravura.
And then you had, I think Dark Horse had their own.
They had Legends.
with that
Legends.
Easter Island
Right,
logo.
right.
So my
Legends
question
was
is,
for the Legends was for creator-owned stuff made by specific people.
John Byrne, Frank Miller.
right?
Yeah, their superhero universe was called Comics' Greatest World.
Right.
So my question for you guys is: you have these creator-owned imprints, I guess, within those companies. Why do you think they were just loyal to those companies, these creators, or maybe they could give them an even better deal, or they just like the system a little bit better in terms of?
I think it was what they were familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there were some of those Image guys, especially Rob Liefeld, would badmouth some of the older guys.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't. I've heard some of the older guys say that. I've talked to a couple of the who are to this day is like, I can't believe the stuff he said about me. And I'm like, it's okay to forgive him now. He was a brash 19-year-old.
You're right, yeah.
But I think that has a lot to do with it too. I think there were like there's a legendary day where they all came. I wasn't there for it. I only heard of it later on. I wasn't in that day where Lee, Life, all those guys came into the Marvel offices for like the first time together or something. This is before Image.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
And they were, and especially Liefeld was just he was so disrespectful to John Romita that everybody hated him.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, I saw him continue that. I have to find it. It's he put out a tweet where something Life. I love following Liefeld on Twitter. He's so entertaining. But he I think it was a new Warriors annual. And he's like, this is the only time I ever worked over a John Romita layout, and it's my worst cover. And he said something bad about John in that tweet too, and people were just like, people on Twitter, of course, were like, "What? I think that's your best cover," and stuff like that. But to this, so I think that had something to do with them not working for Image. They didn't want to work with those guys.
Yeah,
or specifically Rob Liefeld.
Yeah, that could be.
I don't know about that. I've never heard anyone complain about the rest of the guys.
It's interesting, even now, where you hear people doing creator owned work, but it's not for Image. So it's like, to me, it's like maybe do they pitch Image and they didn't want to work with them, or do they have some other one they're more comfortable with working with? Just
keep in mind, Image kicked Rob out eventually, right, so I think he wasn't
then they kissed him to
work with.
Yeah. But it's interesting to me because, like, you think creator owned, you think Image, right?
Yeah.
And then you have all these other companies. Let's say now 2023, what other, aside from Image, what companies will offer, will accept you to give you a creator owned deal? Like they'll just they'll handle the distribution, printing, a little bit of marketing. Well, otherwise you keep it all. Like,
there are
who's
so
out there?
many companies, I can't remember all of them. Like Dark Horse still has creator owned stuff,
right?
But Dark Horse will insist on having some sort of representation, money for representation when it comes to licensing for other media, and they always have.
And speaking of Image, like Robert Kirkman's imprint on Image is the same way. Skyline. Is that
Skybound.
It? Skybound. There we go. It's the same thing. They'll actually give you a good page rate, but they have some say in some cut of the marketing and stuff like that.
Right. Remember, I worked for a short time for AWA. It's Axel Alonso,
Artists Writers Alliance,
Artists Writers Artisans. It was Bill Jemis and Axel. Axel's still there. Jemis is not. Okay,
right.
I worked there for 5 minutes, but I think they give very good deals to the creators, but it's a lot of creators that Axel worked with at Marvel, understandably, like JMS. Right. I think is one of them. And then Frank Cho, who I really like, and so what I'm saying, it's not like I was privy or looked at the deal like that. Mm-hmm. This is the agreements, right. But I'd be curious to side by side them with elsewhere.
Well, one of the things you can do too is check the indicias. Like mm-hmm. It was a Sleepy Reader who noticed over the years that a lot of times these days, even at Image, the copyright is to the writer.
Right.
So often what happens is the writer hires an artist and the writer owns the copyright on everything. And you can only tell, you can tell that through reading the indicia.
And the artist becomes work for hire, just like
right.
anyone
The artist
else.
Work for hire.
Yeah.
On it.
Okay. If they know what they're getting into, it's just,
mm-hmm. Just because you know what you're getting into doesn't mean you're not getting ripped off.
It depends. Listen, as I think if you know what you're getting into and you're weighing, okay, I'm doing this for exposure.
You're weighing, I have to work for a living.
Yeah.
With I'm getting ripped off. I mean, that's what it is. It's not like you're saying the only thing you're getting in return is the fact that you have to work for a living.
Yeah.
It's not like having a job is optional.
Mm-hmm. Right.
If having a job were optional, then you wouldn't be vulnerable to being ripped off. Being that having a job is not optional, these artists can get ripped off easily.
Right. Yeah. It's like any other walk in life, though. It's like, if you need dough and you're like, man, what will you do?
Most of the time, all they take is your time. When you're an artist, they take your intellectual property.
Mm-hmm.
They don't just take your time.
Good point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Tit Goblin says, I always laugh at the titles of companies. Innovation wasn't innovative. Now was old. Defiant wasn't defiant towards anything. Image had crappy images, etc. Continuity had none. That is true.
One thing is that some people kind of imagine Vertigo as being creator-owned. The Vertigo line was not was not started so it had creator-owned comics. The fact that it had creator-owned comics was sort of a byproduct of the type of line that they were doing.
DC's creator-owned was shady as hell, which is why Alan Moore got ripped off by Watchmen. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, I just saw, I can't remember who it was, somewhere said, ooh, we finally got ownership back of our whatever the comic was that they did for Vertigo 20 years later. Because it wasn't a success for Vertigo, and you got to wait for 20 years and if Vertigo reprints it in those 20 years, you got to wait another 20 years. Mm-hmm. So creator-owned stuff isn't always creator-owned.
Yeah. And if they make a movie out of it, you'll get a love check with 3 figures.
I always point out it's like to people who who resent Alan Moore for complaining, like he know what he signed. I'm like, no, he didn't. And second of all, Watchmen was sold to us, the fans, as a creator-owned book. That's how it was sold to us. That's why I bought Watchmen.
Was it really?
Book from DC.
It was when I started collecting. It was on issue 11 or 12.
Right.
So I wasn't collecting during the initial promotional push for it, right? And I didn't even know until like after the fact, like, oh, these were Charlton characters that they were kind of repurposed.
Mm-hmm. And originally they weren't Charlton characters. DC insisted he make them into Charlton characters.
Oh, because then
DC saw what he was doing with the Charlton characters and said, don't make them Charlton characters. That's the actual story.
Right.
You can read him saying it. Originally, he pitched the story not as Charlton characters. When an editor DC said, if we want to get this made, we just want the Charlton characters. Why don't we do this as a pitch for the Charlton characters?
Somewhere around the middle of that story, they were trying to get the Archie superheroes. Yeah. Because the instead of the comedian, it was going to be the Shield who died.
So to say, I mean, they were ultimately based on the Charlton characters, but that's because DC insisted that they would be based on them. It wasn't Alan Moore who insisted on that.
There's one thing that I like to have answered is, according to Jim Shooter, the Epic deal was the best deal for creator-owned stuff that ever existed in the history of American comics. Mm-hmm. Could J.M. DeMatteis explain how much money he got from, how much control and money he got from Epic when Moon Shadow was first published, and how much he got from DC when Vertigo reprinted the story?
Interesting, yeah.
Was the DC, was it this reprinting the same story as a continuation, or is I just don't know.
They reprinted it as a graphic novel, the Moon Shadow.
Yeah, they reprinted 12-issue mini as a 12-issue mini. Mm-hmm. And then they did the Farewell Moon Shadow sequel as a short graphic novel.
Mm-hmm. I remember loving that art, just
because the DC one was shady in that it's like the creators owned, I forget which portion of it, the trademark, but not the copyright or something like that. Either way, it's like in no way could Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons publish The Watchmen without DC's permission. But DC didn't need their permission to publish it. There was something, I forget exactly. I don't know, but I know it was something. They were all like that at DC. Epic wasn't like that. Epic was the artist held the copyright and the trademark on it. And if Marvel wanted to publish it again, they just negotiate again.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the French kind of do something like that because in Europe we use the Berne Convention, which means that if you're the author, you must be identified as the moral author at all times, even if you're no longer working on new stories featuring the stories based on featuring elements based on the original stories you created. Mm-hmm. At the same time, nobody makes contracts where you get rights in perpetuity. Nobody, not even the publisher. But depending on the success, and depending on the contracts, they get renewables. Because Hergé died in 1983, Casterman still owned the rights to republish Tintin.
Now, is there inherent copyright to the creators in France? In the U.S. nowadays, if you create something, you have the inherent copyright to it, and someone has to show paperwork that they now have the copyright.
Yeah, the thing is, you can sell the stuff, but because Uderzo, before he died, he sold the rights to Asterix,
right,
to Hachette. In fact, Hachette is one of the Hachette never had a comics line, but now they finally have one because they own Asterix. But they still have to put Goscinny and Uderzo in the comic. Although at this stage, I don't think they have to pay the descendants any residuals because Uderzo sold the rest of the publishing rights directly, sold everything directly to Hachette, not just the publishing rights. Because one thing are publishing rights, another thing are moral rights.
Okay.
The moral rights are the ones where you have to be identified as the author. And that's what Dupuis have. That's what Casterman have with Tintin. They have the publishing rights. They don't have the rights to anything else. The widow and her lover have the rights to everything else. The thing, you can go to Tintin stores in France and Belgium. All the merchandising belongs to the descendants, and the publisher gets nothing. The publisher continues to put out the books to make sure that the books are in print, and the widow only has the rights to the residuals according to copyright law.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think there's any law on residuals in the U.S. I think that's
it's not residuals. It's
whatever.
It's
Royalties, incentive
royalties.
checks.
Yeah, royalties. Yeah,
incentives. The wordplay.
Right. If the publisher doesn't want to pay you royalties, they have to hire you outright, or they have to buy everything from you.
Right.
They have to have a contract that says, buy all the rights for this money, and but no publisher does that in Europe because ultimately the majority of them are not interested in merchandising.
Okay.
Or there's stuff that's not merchandising. A lot of these guys they're also book publishers, not just comic publishers.
Right.
They have a publishing company, and the comics are a division of that publishing company. So everything gets normal. Yeah, gets normal contracts for publishing and royalties. They give you an advance. You make the stuff. If you outsell the advance, you get royalties. If you don't, you have to pay them back.
Whoops!
But the rest
be fun.
Because a lot of the properties they're not marketable beyond that. You might make a movie out of that, and at this stage, the Flammarion Group probably does have movie rights in the contracts because they have a new media division. But apart from that, no, they always have to credit and pay the authors for everything that they are legally entitled to, and nobody tries to screw the creators out of that in that regard.
Who owns the Smurfs? Those things have been marketed out since the 70s all over the place.
Yeah, probably at this stage, probably the. I'm not sure if the descendants sold it. Let me check.
Where is that from? Denmark or like Holland?
No, it's from Belgium. Rasmus Klump is from Denmark.
I remember seeing, like, when the Smurfs were popular here as a kids' cartoon series, pictures of the Smurfs, like graphic novels from France or something.
Those PVC figures are everywhere.
They're all having fights with these swords, and it was like, what the?
It was also at the time a ColecoVision game. If you remember a ColecoVision, that was the animation was like at the time was astonishingly good, and now it's like, but at the time it looked like I was like, wow, it's like a cartoon.
Well, Smurfs was also a spin-off of another book. They were kind of like Popeye in the sense of they were characters in the forest, and they got so popular they ended up taking over the comic strip, if I remember correctly. And I only know a little bit about them because I lettered them for paper cuts. And I was trying to see if I had an issue around here that would have had the indicia to see who currently owns them. Because I believe the creator had passed.
And paper cuts. I mean, we talked about they got is Mad Cave or Mike Martz's. Is that paper cuts reversed?
That's the company that bought them. That purchased.
Mad Cave bought them. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So the French Wikipedia article on Pierre Cullifort. Ses enfants continuent de gérer les structures et l'œuvre qu'il. Okay, so his children continue to manage the Payot's work, including keeping the contract with Lombard updated in order to continue to keep the Smurfs in print, as well as the Johan and Pierre-Louis, which is from where the Smurfs come, and another series which is kind of funny called Benoit Brisefer. I think Benoit Brisefer was published in English. Let me check.
So Johan and basically the Magical Flute movie, you had introduced those two kids. It was their comic strip first.
Yeah,
and
Johan
so
and Pierre-Louis.
Smurfs, yes. So those kids had the comic strip, and then Smurfs became just so popular.
Jeff Smith needs to send Smurfs some love checks, as long as he sends them to what's his name, Pogo Possum first.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The other comic by Peyo that's funny to read because it's like a 5-year-old that's super strong. Benoit Brisfer. In English, it was published as Benny Break Cavern in the UK.
Huh.
I don't think it's been published in the US.
Yeah, I don't know that one at all.
No, I never heard of that one myself.
I know it was published in Portugal around the 1970s.
Which came first, the Smurfs or Pogo Possum?
Pogo, I think. But I'm not sure.
That's
Pogo
like
was...
for I didn't know how Buck Rogers predated Flash Gordon by like 5-10 years or something like that, right?
Yeah, I don't remember which was first.
Of Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, or
yeah, I couldn't have told you. If Buck
I think
Rogers
Buck Rogers is 5-10 years older.
Okay.
Buck Rogers was around 1924 or 25. The novel, the comic strip starts in 1929, and Flash Gordon in 1934.
Yeah.
By the way, I just recently saw on some site greatest 15 comic strips of all time. And Gasoline Alley / Walton Skizix wasn't on it, so I completely dismissed the list and ignored it. Like this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Bye.
Okay, the first appearance of the Smurfs, La Flûte à Six Trous, published in Journal du Spirou.
1958?
1958, yep.
Yep.
So yeah, Pogo is earlier, but I don't think that he was that's even based.
Yeah, they're all influenced by Disney. Disney is like one of the biggest influences out there. Disney animation. So I think Walt Kelly worked for Disney Animation. Can't remember, but that influenced the world. Japanese manga is certainly influenced by Disney, which in turn influenced lots of other stuff these days. Let's see. Did I get anything else interesting this week? Time Before Time, number 20. This continues to be good, with George Coella drawing in this story arc. Takes place in the past now, in the future, and it's just this is a very underrated comic. It's been good the whole time through, and sort of each story arc is a little different, and there's time travel in it. And
what issue is that?
Is this up to issue 20?
Good run.
And I gotta say, I never that this is on issue 20 is kind of amazing to me because I always kind of expected it to peter out, and it hasn't.
Are they getting it out monthly, or is it like?
I don't know about monthly, but they're getting it out monthly when they do their arcs. A lot of times, comics these days come out. You know, they do a 5 or 6 issue arc monthly, disappear for a couple months, do another arc.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been like I said, it's like I hardly see it talked about anywhere. But good, solid comic.
Is it just called Time? I'm trying to, or is it something?
Time Before Time.
The best publishing plan would be put out an arc every month, then put out the hardcover 4 to 8 weeks after the last issue of the arc.
Does then TKO go ahead, pal?
I think that's what Image does.
Yeah. Then create the next arc and put out the TPB 1 month before you start the next arc.
That's usually what Image does. It's like they take a break, they get the trade paperback out, and they take a break a month later, they get the trade paperback out, and then they get the next issue. Sometimes like the trade paperback comes out the week the new issue comes out too. So you can jump on the new issue if you like the TPB or the week after or something.
Do you know TKO? Is it TKO Presents, that company? TKO?
Yes.
So I'm not even sure if they still do this. I'm probably getting it a little bit wrong. What do? They print, like, let's say it's a 6-issue miniseries. I think they print all 6 and put it in a slipcase. So you could buy either that or a trade collection.
You could buy the 6 issues. You can buy the 6 issues in a slipcase, or you can buy it as a trade paperback, all at the same time.
God, I don't know about that business plan.
I know, especially as it wasn't in. though they did they sold me one collected edition, because they also released the first issue of everything digital for free.
Right.
You could read the first issue digitally, and if you like it, order the other stuff. It was one of those things where shipping was too much for me to order it, but then eventually it showed up on Amazon. So Sarah was the one I got.
Right, that's the one. Right. So I remember being like, I found it really interesting. Like I think 6 issues, like individual floppy as a slipcase, sounds awesome. Like production wise, it's like a really good looking. But it's like, and the collectors, you get into the whole thing. What if one of the 6 on the inside is dinged up or something, or you get into all those scenarios.
Well, and the problem I have with it too is I like reading the individual issues over time as it's serialized.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I have no reason to buy the individual issues.
Yeah.
And I can remember I was at my local comic shop once years ago, and there was a guy who was like a Spider-Man fan. He liked to buy everything Spider-Man. He was getting the latest Spider-Man comics at various different times. I was like, well, if you're a big Spider-Man fan, why don't you just get the collected editions? He's like, they're not first printings. That's really why he wanted the individual issues, because those were the first printings, which makes me say, if you're trying to sell to somebody like that, who I assume there's more than him out there, who they want the individual issues because they're the first printings. Which are the first printings? The individual comics? There's no first printing.
It depends. I mean, I love cover art. I'm sure we all do here. Yeah. So I'm a huge fan of cover art, and that's why I love just like kind of flipping through comics to see just like albums, right?
Yep.
But there are some things that like I'll just buy a hardcover because I just want, like, at least the covers are reproduced of the interior, right? So
if it's something that's already out, sometimes it's easier to get the collected edition.
Sure.
Tracking down the individual.
That's what I did with The Last Ronin. It was just easier to wait and get it in a trade paperback.
Now that was funny. You should have seen me. And, I'm not a Turtles fan. Never bought the Turtles. But when that was coming out, I was like, "Ooh, this sounds pretty cool. Maybe I'll buy it." But then I was like, how many issues was it? 5 or 6?
I think so, something like that. It might have been just 4.
No, it was at least 5. It may have been 5.
Okay.
It was more than 4. Must have been 5.
Which Turtles book are you? The original?
No, the one that just came out 2 years. It's called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Last Ronin.
Oh, okay, got it.
And this was it was like the last Turtles story. 3 of the turtles were dead. Only 1 turtle was left fighting against the Hand. So it was set up. Supposedly, Eastman and Laird wrote this in the late 80s and never published it. And they finally got around to, I think one of them's even gone now. I forget which one. Eastman or Laird. I mean, he has nothing.
One of them sold the rest of it to the other one, and then the other one sold the rest of it.
I think Eastman's still around, right?
Eastman still does stuff.
So it was Eastman was writing it with some other guy, and they hired an artist to draw it, and they were going to tell this last turn. I said, "Oh, that sounds kind of cool. Maybe I'll buy this." But then I think it was like $8 or $9 an issue, and I was like, "Ooh, do I like it? $50 worth? Do I really want to?" And I do that when I see me. I'm like, "Do I want to commit $50 to this series?"
Were they 22-page kind of comics?
No, they were bigger than that. And they turned out to be, they were oversized too. They were that Golden Age original Turtle size. And that's what kind of tipped me over into saying, all right, I'll buy the individual issues. But I was saying to myself, well, if I really want to read it, I can probably get a collected edition of it for half that price when it's all collected together. But I eventually said, I'll buy it. And I did enjoy reading it over time as a periodical, but I got to tell you, I don't think I liked it $50 worth.
Right. Yeah.
But the issues actually were short printed, and I could probably sell them, the individual issues, for more than $50 now, if I wanted to. Because, like I said, the first issue was one of those that took everybody by surprise how much demand there was for it.
Yeah.
Because it was under ordered, because nobody expected anybody. But all of a sudden, all these old Turtles fans wanted to get it.
Right.
So they immediately rushed a second printing out.
So when a comic that had actual scarcity.
Yeah, that had actual scarcity.
Legit.
Yeah.
Legit.
How rare.
When I was back at Marvel and you guys were there, 2005-ish, like, I remember talking to maybe like Warren Simons and some other, just about kind of postulating like what would it take to bring lapsed readers, at least for a short time, back into like,
right.
And it would take like McFarlane returning to Spider-Man or something of that magnitude, like where like, that would play on nostalgia and, I mean, people wouldn't come back permanently. They might come back to buy it here and there, but it would take a lot. So the Turtles stuff, Turtles has like, remember I used to work in retro gaming for like 2.5 years and we put out, this was at Arcade 1-Up, we put out, 4-player version, the 3/4 scale of the Turtles arcade game and the sequels, and Turtles has got that following, man. Like, just it has, I think it has kind of a split following. Like some who remember it pre-animated series, remember the gritty first 2-3 years, and then you have the vast majority, which is the animated era forward, with all the toys and stuff.
God Tank did not like that turtle size. I don't blame you, but that's what sold me. The extra size. I was like, all right. But
that was the size of the originals, that golden age.
It was the side, that golden age side of the Turtles. No, but I can understand people not liking it. People keep all their comics and buy. I have shelves I stuck them on. I stuck them with my magazines on the shelf. So I'm okay with the side, but I can certainly understand people not liking it because, it doesn't fit in your comic boxes.
Hey, back in the day, that's what hurt sales of Give Me Liberty. I'm trying to think what were the things that are odd sizes.
Give Me Liberty was comic size. Barry Windsor Smith's Storyteller was too big for people.
Right. There was some other Frank Miller book that was an odd
300.
No, it might have been not.
I don't remember Frank Miller stuff being odd sizes.
There was something that had it was like square shaped size. It was just like kind of oversized. It might have been. It wasn't.
Mike Aldridge's
Hard boiled. Oh yeah, hard boiled. You're right. That was slightly oversized.
Yeah, and it had. I think it also had odd. It wasn't like a magazine size. It also had kind of weird square dimensions.
It was like a golden age size. Like again.
But you want to show off that Jeff Darrow detail, right? So it's like,
I'm sure that's why they did it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get the size just to stand out.
Yeah.
That's why DC has been doing those graphic novel size things.
They seem so like the Marvel graphic novels back in the 80s. I'm assuming it's the same size. Like
the black label stuff.
Yeah, they seemed at the time like so giant compared to comic book, but they were just magazine size. That's all they really were.
Yeah, they're right
like
around there.
So just but you're so I kind of programmed by that comic size, those bags and boards that fit that size. That anything that was in that seemed like
the Brazilians put them out as oversized magazines, and they were stapled.
Okay.
Oh, the Marvel graphic novels?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's like Death of Captain Marvel, all that stuff, right? Yeah.
I actually preferred my comics stapled to glued.
The perfect bound.
The square bound, yeah. I was
Saddle stitch.
1987 kind of ruined something for me because until then the Brazilian digests they had spines. But then it was cheaper to just staple them. And from 1987, they changed the format. So the staple, the comics were more vulnerable because of the staples.
Right.
Of course, in 1988, because of the rampant, it was galloping inflation by the time in Brazil. I would show they reduced the comics from 80 to 64 pages because of that, and they just couldn't keep up with the prices. I once took out the Havoc and Wolverine Meltdown Brazilian edition.
Right.
Issue number 4 was more than twice as expensive as issue number 1, and those were quarterly. They came out every 2 weeks.
Wow. When you say the digests were stapled, do you mean they were saddle stitched like a regular comic, or did they staple it from the top to the
saddle
bottom?
stitched, yeah. Saddle stitched, yeah.
Those early wave, like Dark Knight and Green Arrow Longbow Hunters and maybe Black Hawk and Hawkworld, those early wave prestige format books, like, so that was the thing, especially Dark Knight, you'd open it up and you get those kind of like crease kind of like, distressing, like on the cover along the spine, like where you've opened it up, right? So then I don't know, I think Killing Joke might have been the first comic that solved it, but like where they actually put like this there's kind of like a preset crease like along the spine.
You're actually supposed to fold it along that crease. Have you ever seen someone demonstrate like how you're supposed to fold a trade paperback, one of those comic book covers?
Right.
No comic book fans ever do it.
Yeah.
But it's actually built to be folded over.
Right.
It's kind of interesting.
But Killing Joke was the first one to have like that kind of slit. I can't really, I'm not articulating it well. That like, so you open it and it wouldn't like crack like the cover
along the on the front
exactly
and back.
Right.
There's
and then from there forward, most of them in prestige format had like the Batman, the Cult. I'm trying to think of other ones, but there was a Havoc and Wolverine in the American version did not have that, and that was during that time. So
I still want to. I don't have a copy of Batman the Cult, but I can remember reading my friend John's copy of it, and Batman the Cult number 3 had pages out of order. And as far as I know, I'm the only one who ever noticed. I pointed it out to my friends, and they were just like, "Oh, we just thought the storytelling was confusing." And I've never seen that mentioned anywhere, that there are pages out of order in the original printing of Batman the Cult number 3. And so I
don't think they ever caught that.
I want to get a copy. It's like nobody caught it because it was like during like a Batmobile chase scene or something I have a vague memory of. And
he's got that big tank Batmobile kind of thing. I remember with all like the zombie kind of guys hanging out.
How did people not note? And just none of my friends noticed. And since then, I've never heard anyone notice it. So it's like I want to get a copy of it to look just to make sure I'm right.
I know where my copies are. I'll be right back.
I have it, but they're in my storage facility, which is known as my parents' house, where I have my comics. But
I never had a copy of it.
The Cult's been out of print in terms of a trade for quite a while.
I'm talking the original issue.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure they fixed it for the collection.
Paperback, brand new off the shelf. When I opened it, half the pages fell out. Oh yeah, glue bindings. That can be trouble. My copy I used to have of Seth's is a good life if you don't weaken. I had a trade paperback of it. Same thing happened. I read it once, maybe twice, and pages started to fall out. Then I went and got a library bound copy of it.
You read my mind. I was going to ask you, have you ever sent comics off the library binding to have them like stitched, and they basically do the whole stitching thing and the whole.
Sometimes libraries bind it themselves. I have of all things, I have a library-bound copy of the first, 6th issue of Cross Gen's Negation, where they just take like the trade paperback and hard bind it.
Is that the actual name of the company, library binding? Where say if you have a stack of comics, like
no, it's just the name of
the name of a process.
Yeah, it's the name of a process, and it's done for libraries. I think some libraries do it, but you can you can get your comics bound in hardcover by places.
The first time I ever saw that was actually at the Marvel Archives.
Yeah. They used to send the comics out to some place.
Yeah, like this is amazing.
One of the Omaha Bound is one of the people I follow on Twitter. I think he's a guy who works at a place that binds comics.
And they will like kind of do some gold leaf embossing, sort of like.
Yeah, they'll do whatever. All sorts of stuff you can do.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, I had I had it in a sold years ago. This in the late '80s. There was that leather-bound Dark Knight. It was Frank Miller's Batman, Dark Knight, and it had Batman Year One in it. It was leather-bound. I'm sure it's easily found on eBay. I don't know what it goes for, but
I remember that one.
Yeah, it was real nice. It had like that kind of like metallic, kind of embossed cover. Now I want to go buy it. Yeah, I want to go reacquire it. That's the bane of my existence, is reacquiring things I owned. But most
Take
of it
them
I
out
have.
of the library. I haven't gone to the library much last year, but before then, I was going to the library. You can go to the library. You can order stuff up. I ordered up Watchmen Absolute Edition and V for Vendetta Absolute Edition just to look at them.
Just to look at the.
Because I don't even want to read the Watchmen anymore. I'm not a big Watchmen fan. I'm a big V for Vendetta fan, so I read that. But it was just like I just wanted to read it. I just wanted
the
to look at
absolutes
it.
are the ones that are oversized, or
Yes, those are the big ones, big hardcover.
Right. It's not. It's in color. It's not the black. It's not like an artisan edition. It's
no. It's in colors.
Yeah.
But it was like, you can find stuff like that at the library, and like I said, my library, and probably yours too, orders them from other libraries. They send them to them. You just pick them up, keep them for a month, and send them back.
They're they're in circulation in a library system.
Yeah. So if you want that Watchmen leather edition, see if you can get it at the library. You don't even have to pay. And you'll have it for a month. You'll put it back and go, wow, I'm glad I had that for a month.
I want to buy it.
If I need it again, I'll go get it from the library.
As much as I like David Lloyd's art, to me, I would rather have a special edition Watchmen like that. Because unlike you, I have read the text pieces, and I always read the text pieces because they're important to the story.
Oh, they're not text pieces. They're the Black Freighter. The Black Freighter is in no way, shape, or form important to the story. I'm sorry.
The Black Freighter is inside the story. The one with the Bird magazine article written by.
You are not going to convince me they're important. The story isn't even important. I love looking at it. I mean, Dave Gibbons' artwork is beautiful. And the story he's telling is beautiful. I just have no interest in the actual writing.
Unfortunately, I could not find a copy. I thought I saw them earlier today because I was looking through a bunch of trade paperbacks. I was looking for something in particular, and I thought I saw the covers to The Cult. And unfortunately, I looked in the long box I was checking, and I did not find them. I did find a copy of Death's Head, though.
Ah, look at that. I do not think libraries are going to go extinct. Libraries are very well trafficked. Libraries are a lot more vibrant than we know. I've read about just the amount of business libraries do is astounding. They're not going anywhere.
No, not at all.
And if you're actually trying to look up any information about anything, as long as they keep the collecting all the newspapers and even on digital files, they will always have somebody who, because they're the only ones that actually keep the newspapers. Even newspapers don't keep their own newspapers.
There was the story, of that guy. I can't remember his name. He died a few years ago. But he was the guy when libraries and newspapers were he was a comic strip fan. And when libraries and newspapers were getting rid of their old printed copies, he bought them and started warehousing them. And he's the only reason we have good copies of comic strips from the teens, the 20s, and the 30s, because he made his own, and he had to learn how to warehouse them in order to, and that's where everybody got their copies of those old comic strips from. And I think he died, I don't know, sometime in the early 20th century. His wife took it over, and then she died. I can't remember his name though, but he was famous as the only one because the libraries and the newspapers didn't want their physical copies anymore because they put them on microfiche.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking about everything going digital. There's still a lot of books and there's still a lot of stuff in libraries. I don't think people still like paper.
And people thought
you can microfiche. I don't understand what the problem is there. You can get good quality out of a microfiche scan.
Not all the time, I guess. I'm guessing you probably could if it was done right and archived right and you had access to it. But
and you pay someone to do that if it's not going to be easy and cheap. They're not going to do
As
it.
someone who knows how badly people scan things, because you don't put your best and brightest in charge of scanning your archives. You put your interns in charge of it. And
I still go to the library, and they're packed. They're always packed. They
I remember a few years ago, I saw some statistic or something like the business of libraries is bigger than the movie business. That's how big a business it is. It's not going anywhere.
my sister's a librarian, and she has events. You know, they had a Marvel trivia not too long ago, and so their kids going there all the time. And so it's like, I never knew our local library was like a popping place. And when I went to they renovated the one that was on the corner where Marvel used to be, the Nachos, the Stravos Library. You know, there's a cafe on the roof. There's a rooftop cafe now up there as well.
I actually heard an interesting social observation about libraries, in that libraries are one of the only social spaces left where you're not expected to spend money.
Mm-hmm.
Because every social space we go to, your bars, clubs, cafe, you're expected to spend money. The library, you're not expected to. It's the only place. I was like, oh, I never thought of that before.
You can spend your time there, and then, you know, get the books, and you don't even have to deal with people.
Yeah,
there's an app that you can just basically go ahead, scan it, and walk out the door. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. I spent a lot of time in libraries, know a bunch of librarians, and they're extremely important as a community service for a ton of other stuff other than book rentals. Yeah, you aren't going anywhere. One interesting thing, once again, it's unique to libraries and librarians. A librarian is a gatekeeper job, but it's the only gatekeeper job where the job is to keep the gates open. Every other gatekeeper job is to keep people out who don't belong there. Which is why librarians get extremely angry at censorship and stuff like that, because it is their job to keep the gates open. And it's the only job like that. If you're a gatekeeper anywhere else, it is your job to keep the undesirables out. That is not a librarian's gatekeeper job. So that's why librarians are sort of a special breed and a special social force, where when, fascists want to close the gates, it's the librarians who are often the canaries in the coal mines who are like, no, we got to keep these gates open. They're trying to close the gates, which is why you hear such uproars over banning books in Florida and other places, because it's their job to keep the gates open. That's good to hear. I live in a small town in Texas. The library is not much, but they did get a cool 3D printer. All right. Yeah, there are places that do not, mostly places that want to control the social order do not like libraries, because they do not want gatekeepers keeping the gates open. They want to control what people see and hear. And libraries are about letting everybody see and hear everything. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the fact that you can use their computers, that they'll help you print out stuff, write your resume and all that. There's still people who are still trying to navigate email. And, they have classes on it and stuff like that. So, I don't see libraries closing up soon. The New York ones, just visiting them are amazing, just what they have. The one, the really big one that has the lions, has the original Winnie the Pooh toys that he based the stories on. You can actually visit them. And, for a short time, they had the Marvel, the Spider-Man card.
That's a fantastic outlook, Jared. Yeah, I have a soft spot for librarians, at least conceptually. I really don't know any librarian. Though except the ones at my local library who I chat with every now and then. I mean, I think one classmate of mine eventually became a librarian. I just know her on Facebook these days, but I think she became very cool. Thanks. Mm-hmm. Do. But yeah, use your library. I get from my library, like I'm gonna have to get into the habit of going to it again, because kind of last year, 2022, I somehow got out of the habit. I don't know why. But it's like I would have 3 or 4 library books just sitting. I think I got out of the habit because I had so many books I bought that I hadn't read yet, so I wanted to read them. But now I'm gonna have to get back. I would just look up online. I'd look for books. I'd look for like Marvel and DC stuff that I'd never in a million years pay for. Like I read the Matt Fraction when he relaunched the X-Men. Was it Matt Fraction who did that? The whatever that was a few years ago. The relaunch of the X-Men when they came with the oversized hardcover. I'm like, all right, get me that one. I'll read it. I should say I tried to read it. I got about a quarter of the way through and put it down. But that's what's good about the library too, is you can it's like like I said before, I'm not a huge Watchmen fan. I actually don't. I sold my original Watchmen issues recently, a couple of years ago, because I needed the money. So I don't actually have a copy of the Watchmen. I'm like, I want to look at. I don't want to read the Watchmen, but I want to look at it. So I was like, checked my library, Absolute Edition, send it on over. And I had it here for a month or two. You can even online extend you have the book for 3 weeks. You can say, I want it for another 2 weeks, and just hit a button and you got it for another 2 weeks.
Now the first extension is automatic.
It's great. Yeah. And you can see how many copies your library has, where it's coming from. And it's like, you want a copy? Some library in Ohio has a copy. Just send it to my library, and like 3 days later it's there. It's like, oh, okay.
I meant to ask. I'm sorry, I'm getting off libraries, but Watchmen. Like I remember reading somewhere that what do you think of the coloring on Watchmen? Because my understanding is that they went with like these really garish secondary, tertiary colors because they wanted to be kind of like, keep you on edge or off. But there was like some psychological like color theory thing going on with the color.
I was always fine with the color. I never noticed it. Listen, I've never been a huge Watchmen fan. I bought it as it was coming out. I just like to me, Watchmen was an indie comic for mainstream superhero fans.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was bad. I loved the Dave Gibbons artwork. Mm-hmm. In no way, shape, or form thought it was terrible, but it's just not interesting to me. Because
my personality is when I'm told something I should think as being genius. My personality is across my arms, like, oh, you're not going to tell me what you think is brilliant, But like that being said, like I listen. Watchmen's been in kind of print millions and millions of copies, or you could get like, for like $10 off of any given time off of Amazon, right? I still don't own a copy. I've read it in pieces online. I've watched at least on YouTube God, what's it called, the animated comic, motion comics, I'm fascinated by it, by like the work put into it, but like the Tales of the Black Freighter stuff, that's like a story within the story, which kind of parallels what's going on with the actual characters.
I've only actually read The Watchmen twice, once as it was coming out and once a few years later. And then though I had a terrific time when I got the Absolute Edition a few years ago, I would just pick it up, flip the random pages, look at the artwork, read some bits and pieces of it, and I just had a great time doing that. I mean, it's just so well crafted, The Watchmen, that it's just a wonderful piece to just. I just have no interest in this kind of subject matter, but I can really appreciate, especially like I said, looking at that Absolute Edition and just picking up and flipping through. The craftsmanship of The Watchmen is just A+. But there's plenty of other things I'd rather actually read. But that's just.
By the way, the HBO show, I loved that show. That was
never watched it. Never had an interest.
I thought they did a great job, like kind of being in universe, but like 30 something years later.
I just have zero interest in The Watchmen as a universe.
Right. Well, the one thing I will say is I love the show, but like I do not know why. I think they've stopped it. I don't know why DC continues to like try to shoehorn Watchmen
make
into
money.
I guess it's just like enough already.
I read a little of that. What was it? The Doomsday Clock? I think I read
That's
the
what I'm
first
talking
2
about.
or 3 issues just out of curiosity. And I have to say, once again, that was an extreme. Jeff Johns wrote it and Gary Frank drew it.
Mm-hmm.
Extremely well crafted comic, but pointless in that the Watchmen is a self-contained
That's
novel.
what I'm saying. I understand.
It's a self-contained statement about superheroes.
Yeah.
The first thing that Jeff Johns and Gary Frank have to do is contradict what the Watchmen's about, because it was self-contained. That was the whole point of it.
There's a moment there when all the members of the JLA attack Dr. Manhattan, and
I didn't get that far.
The captions with Dr. Manhattan's thoughts are clearly about the character fighting the plot. Like, what am I doing here? This is stupid.
Yeah.
You can infer from the captions that's what Dr. Manhattan's actually thinking. This is stupid. I think that was even a moment, a subconscious moment of realization on Jeff Johns' part. This does not make any sense.
I think he, like I said, it was so well constructed in terms of continuity minutia that it was amazing how well, but pointless. It's like, why do you have to shoot if instead of trying to shoehorn the Watchmen into the DC universe, they just started writing a DC universe story with the Watchmen, it would have made the same amount of sense in terms of like. But he went, like I said, the amount of construction he did to fit the Watchmen into the DC universe, like pointlessly in my mind. I was like, well, why does anyone need? Can't you just write a story with Dr. Manhattan in the DC universe?
Did that even stick around? Like that whole concept?
So.
I feel like that was it.
The problem was it took, I don't know, 2.5 years for Doomsday Clock to be complete. What was supposed to happen was Doomsday Clock was supposed to lead into sort of this new era of the DC universe. But it took so long for Doomsday Clock to get done that the DC universe had to move on without it.
And there was just shakeups at the actual company itself.
Right. It became completely and utterly pointless.
Yeah.
My friend Rob, who's reading at the time, I mean, he's a DC. My friend Rob is sort of like, he gives me my information of what's going on. And he likes indie comics. He also likes Marvel and DC comics. So he reads current Marvel and DC comics. And at the time that was going on, he was like, Doomsday Clock is so pointless. It's like DC. He's like, the DC universe has moved on from Doomsday Clock, and Doomsday Clock isn't over. So it's just weird. It didn't do what they wanted it to do.
I think they were the new Crisis they were attempting.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a new Crisis. Right, it's supposed to be a new Crisis, a new 52, that sort of thing, but it ended up being sort of its own thing. And
did you read Multiversity?
I read, that's the Grant Morrison one.
Yeah.
I read the issue that was like a tribute to the Watchmen.
Yeah, and there it is. How to do Watchmen in one issue. It works.
The best Watchmen thing I read was the Kieran Gillen and Peter. The first time I read Casper Wingard, which is he's the artist who drew this. They did a Peter Cannon series because Peter Cannon is the guy Ozymandias is supposed to be based on, I think, if I remember correctly. And they did I think it was only 4 or 5 issues. And it was, once again, it was the best Watchmen sequel I have read. And it was kind of this meta commentary on how we should move on from the Watchmen. We should move on from building things around the watch. But it was interesting because it was, I think, was it Peter Cannon? Was that his name? I can't even remember now. It was one of those guys.
Was Ozymandias not based on any of the Charlton?
Yeah, he was.
Okay.
And
I just don't know that Peter Cannon.
But I don't remember. I remember
Pat Morisi bought back the rights to Peter Cannon before he died, and that's why DC can't reprint the Charlton stories or the minis or the series that they did in 1990.
But whoever Dynamite or somebody published this one, they licensed it. But Peter Cannon finds out, the way it ties in with the Watchmen is Peter Cannon finds out that there's somebody from the multiverse destroying universes. And it turns out it's him, Ozymandias, from the Watchmen universe, where his plan didn't work. So he's trying, his plan. The sort of conceit of this was Ozymandias's plan didn't quite work in Watchmen, and it ended up destroying the whole universe. So he's been going from universe to universe trying to get that plan to work. And it keeps destroying universes, which is the concept on people doing Watchmen tie-ins. So eventually he has to stop this other version of himself from destroying universes. And the whole point of it was, can we move on from this? So it was really well done. It was, like I said, the best Watchmen sequel, which was a statement on moving on from the Watchmen.
I have a handful. I may have all of them, but I have a handful of the before Watchmen little minis that they did. So listen, they had Adam Hughes doing. Did the interiors? Maybe the covers though of the Dr. Manhattan one. So I bought it for the art stuff. Like Jay Lee did the Ozymandias.
Amanda Connor did. I put up an issue or two that Amanda Connor did cover. I think she did the insides too, but she did some covers I like.
Oh, Silk Spectre maybe.
Yeah.
I think so. I dug those. Those were cool because again, it wasn't trying to shoehorn into anything.
I just have no interest in the Watchmen as a universe. I don't care.
Yeah,
I'm not that invested in if I'm going to read the Watchmen, I'm going to read Alan Moore, and I don't even want. If I'm going to even look at the Watchmen and examine it, I'm going to read Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. I don't. Why do I want to read anyone else's take on it?
He did some cool. I mean, when that series was coming out, Dave Gibbons did a bunch of. The one piece I'm thinking of is, remember there was that era of role-playing games that they would adapt.
Supposedly there's some good stuff in that. I think Tim Howlermouse has talked about that.
Right. I remember a really nice piece that he did. It might have been a promotional piece for something else that they might have recycled for this, but it was the cover of the Watchmen module for some DC role-playing game or something like that. But it was a beautiful, it's just their heads, but it's really beautifully drawn, and of course I love house ads and all that stuff, even if it's using stuff that's ultimately in the book. But there was the promotional plates they did, and so it was. I always love the extra pieces that is done around a series that are done that were done back in the day.
I think the role playing game was even officially licensed by Alan Moore, and it had his. Because I know Tim Howlermouse, who's on this show sometimes. He's a huge Watchmen fan.
Yeah, and
I think he's mentioned the game and it being and having some interesting stuff and some interesting back matter in it.
Do you think did TSR put that out? I think. I mean, I
don't know
who else, but at the time,
I don't know who published it.
But there was that Marvel role playing game. There's probably some others which they probably would adapt they would probably just kind of graft the characters onto existing rules and all that stuff.
Yeah, TSR did a lot of those. They did, Marvel. They did the Ninja Turtle ones, which was very popular.
Somewhere I have the Elf Quest role-playing game.
Oh, really? That makes a lot of sense.
From the
Elf
80s.
Quest, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, I have the Marvel ones.
I think I had the Marvel one at one time.
Elf Quest is another thing. The first issue of Elf Quest I bought was an epic issue. It was issue, I don't know, 11 or something. I had no idea. Oh, there we go, Wilson. Yeah, totally. Yeah, you had it right there, ready to go.
I've had them just near me for the longest time, just because there's enough room under my desk where I just happen to keep all the role playing ones.
Do you have Star Frontiers there?
I only have like the Marvel ones, and I have a couple of the D&D
You know what I'm talking
ones.
about? Star
one?
Frontiers was the sci-fi version of Dungeons and Dragons.
No, I've only ever played Dungeons and Dragons
Had awesome art.
and Dark Suns were the only ones that I would have anything from. And then the Marvel ones, I did play the Marvel ones when I was younger. And I had inherited a bunch of them from a buddy of mine. When he went into the service, he just gave me a bunch of his D&D stuff, and I never even opened it. Like, here's another module for Dark Sun.
Right.
I happened to keep them all together. But that particular one that you mentioned, no, because I was not playing any of the...
I like them just for the art and for just like the kind of interior, but Jared, you mentioned I really appreciate in a lot of Marvel trades they have like for the back matter. They'll reprint like house ads and
I still love from my childhood those Fireside books, the origins of Marvel Comics and stuff.
And Sons of Origins and
the Stan Lee written parts I loved. Taught me not to trust Stan Lee, but I loved that history and back matter and all that.
Yeah,
anything about comics history, I love.
I appreciate the thoroughness of if they have the room for it, for them to dig up stuff that was even like in Marvel Age and all that kind of stuff. So
they're putting out a Marvel Age omnibus.
You're right. It's coming out like sometime this year.
I loved these as a kid. I don't think I've read them since the late 70s, but I still want. This is the Jim Steranko History of Comics, Volume 1 and 2. My local library had copies of these, which I took out multiple times.
And you didn't return, I see. You kept them right there.
No. This is the goal. I think there was a warehouse find of these in the early 90s. Back in the days when there was like in the early 90s when there was comic shops everywhere briefly. And like everybody was opening a comic shop in their garage.
Yeah. Anyone who had a collection felt like they could open a
I knew
shop.
someone who opened a comic shop just down the street. And one day he got a bunch of these in. I used to stop by there every now and then. He got a bunch of these in. He didn't even know where they came from. And I was like, how much are they?
It's called new old inventory.
Right.
New inventory. Yeah.
I was like, how much are they? He tried looking up on his order sheet what he paid for. He couldn't find them anywhere. So he sold them for me for cover price, $4.
Yeah.
Nice.
Which is the 1972 price or whenever this came out.
Yeah.
So
I got it from you for $4.50.
Yeah. So I got the 1970
$5.
So I got the two of them for under $10 in like 1992 or something like that.
I need to get copies of those. I've never read those, or I need to borrow from the library copies of those.
Yeah, I mean they're just. I mean, imagine being 12 years old in 1978, learning about the history of Golden Age comics.
It
was like, whoa.
The first book I ever got, not like that, but like is published around 86, 87 ish, was Ron Goulart, who's you guys probably know him. He's like a well-known kind of comic historian, great history of comic books. And like, it went from like, this is where I learned a lot of like, stuff like, wow, I didn't know that Dr. Fate existed in the 1940s. I knew him from like, Justice League in 87. Right. And so like all this is where I learned about like Black Terror and all those like things that are now in public domain, like all those properties.
Right.
But it had reprints in color, had some color sections, some signatures were color, right? It have like, reprints of some covers from the Golden Age stuff. And that was great at the time. It's amazing. Like, if you walked to a comic shop in the 80s and they had back issue selection, the back issues probably only went back so far, but now we've had another 40 years of comic books since the 80s, 35, 40 years. It's like, how could they possibly have inventory of all this, a lot of crap that came out, like, in the 90s, 2000s, that like your quarter box kind of stuff, right? Yeah. So overwhelming, but
yeah, I often wonder how a fan starts today.
It's overwhelming. I guess you start with just like, like, okay, this movie was loosely based on this comic, and start that way.
When I started, my only choice was what was on the newsstand. That was it.
Right.
You saw the newsstand, you picked what you wanted. There was no I couldn't go walk into a store and there was 40 years of comics and in boxes. That'd been amazing, but no. By the way,
I feel like
Every
Okay.
time I see this, I like to point it out. This is my friend's copy from the 70s. They really had good electrical tape in the 70s because this
Right.
spine has had this electrical tape on it, this black electrical tape since the 1970s.
It looks like a school journal, like one's black, like marble school journals that's bound like on the side.
Record keeper.
Yeah.
It's like, man,
Yeah.
they don't make electrical tape like this anymore. That'll keep
But
your
what is that?
treasury
Is that
edition
it's a treasury
binding
edition?
together for 40 years.
Yeah, it's a treasury edition.
Yeah.
Those are always great to look at. Pain in the ass to store.
That's the thing. They're huge. Like I do have some bags that are meant for treasury editions and or newspapers.
Yeah.
They folded in half, like or like so I always remember reading about the treasury editions and never understood there were these giant oversized things. When they were originally sold, how were they sold? I guess they were on magazine stands.
They were on the
huge.
newsstand.
They're huge though.
When I built these shelves, I don't know, 20 years ago, I have shelves all over the place, as you can see. But this particular set of shelves that's behind me when I make my videos normally, when I built those shelves, the one criteria I had for them was they had to be tall enough to fit Treasury edition.
Treasuries, yeah.
I was like, I need a place for my Treasury editions.
What would be the most well-known, like Superman, Muhammad Ali, or maybe Batman, or Batman, Hulk,
Superman,
or Spider-Man? Yeah, Spider-Man, Superman. Yeah, those are the ones everyone knows, right?
Right.
Yeah, pretty much. And they did a lot of holiday specials too.
Yeah.
Or that I just remember the one, and that was all over the place.
What was the heyday of that in the 70s?
Yeah, I got about 10 to 20 of them from my childhood. But they also put out other ones. Let's see here.
But were they
Did
they print a lot in a short stretch, or did they last a lot? Like, what was like the era of like Treasury?
Superman Fantastic
I know that.
Four.
Right.
This is Alex Ross.
Right. But those he did what? He did a
Dan Jurgens
Shazam one. He did he did that, and he did like the Trinity, or actually, and then he did.
This isn't the one he did. This is another. But this came out. Where's the year? 1999.
I remember
Random
seeing these like in
Treasury.
Barnes and Noble, and just they looked enormous, physically enormous. And I was like, "What do you do with this?"
And they had to print enough to go. Those were originally done before comic shops, so they had to print enough for all the newsstands because everyone's carrying them.
So the era of Treasury editions, what would you guess is how long were they newly produced for 5-10 years? Maybe was it less? Like was it a short era?
That I don't know. I never looked them up really. The ones that I had tracked down was because a comic shop happened to have one here and there. So I never got them. I never bought them in the wild when they went, their first run. Even my Superman, Spider-Man books, the first one I had were reprints, so they were smaller.
Right.
By the way, I didn't know I had this. I completely forgot. But here's the back issue magazine dedicated to Treasury edition. That's Treasury edition sized.
Oh, there you go.
Cool.
So let's see. I just saw a checklist in here. I was like, if you had bet me $50 that this was in my collection, I would have lost because I didn't know it was here.
And then that $50 could have bought those Turtles comics you were talking about.
There you go.
Yeah.
Let's see. Bronze Age tabloids and treasury checklist. DC Comics, The Amazing World of Superman Metropolis Edition, 1973.
Is that Tomorrow's Publishing puts out back issue magazine?
Yes.
I have a couple of their books. It's history comics in the 80s and 90s. They're really good. Like they're really really
so
well.
73 is the earliest one I see here. Smurfs Treasury #1, 1983. I didn't know that was out.
Who published that though? The Marvel?
That was Marvel, right?
Yeah, because I remember them. They had the Smurfs for a short time, I think.
Yeah, they did a 4-issue miniseries.
Yeah.
1980, 81 was Superman and Spider-Man 2. That was around though. So it looks like most of them were 75 through 80. Oh, 74 was Marvel Treasury Edition #1. And the last one was called Marvel Treasury Edition 28, 81 was Superman and Spider-Man 2. So the Marvel ones looks like they went from the numbered ones go from 74 to 81. They also have
Right.
like Star Wars one. There's ones outside the numbering.
Now, did they stay in print, or were they just like regular periodicals?
I think
once
they were just
out
like
there?
regular comics.
Like they were
get
one
in
and
out.
done, whoever the print run was.
Okay.
I mean, it makes sense. Like, that's like the golden age of magazine stands, like the 70s, where there was everything. I could see those. They probably were in supermarkets too, I guess, right?
Yeah. Does that say anything about the print runs at all?
I
Any
don't
numbers?
know. I'd have
That's
to.
a good question.
We'd have to look in here. I mean, I'd have to read it closer to figure out if it says anything about the print runs. Because we had the checklist. I don't think had anything about the print runs.
Oh, okay.
Let's see if there's an article on sales. Flashback, Beyond Capes, Flashback, tabloid team-ups, tabloid checklist. I don't see anything about sales, so maybe.
I'm trying to think. Now I'm thinking about the Marvel movie special. I know I have the Dune one because of Sienkiewicz, and I probably have a Star Wars one. I'm trying to think of the magazine-sized movie specials that Marvel put out.
Oh yeah. Marvel. What was that called? What was the movie? Marvel Premiere? No, Marvel Preview.
No, the actual movie.
It was a series. Marvel had they put their movie specials out in magazine series, and then they printed them in comics too.
Right. Yeah. I definitely have the Dune one. I don't have a lot. I have Dune.
Or the Bizarre Adventures.
I have most of those. No, Bizarre Adventures was in the same line. Marvel movie. I'll have to look on my.
Bizarre Adventures was an anthology book. The one that everyone was after back in the day there was an X-Men cover.
Yeah.
That was Bizarre Adventures. That was in Marvel Preview, which was their black and white magazine. Marvel Super Special was their movie adaptations.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
Those
were tablet size.
Yeah, those were magazine size. Marvel Super Special.
Pablo, did you ever get the Treasury editions? It's a question that Tick Goblin is asking.
No. I had never heard of Treasury editions before the 1990s. Although we had something interesting with the digest sizes. Unsold, we had a Disney title which always had a theme. It was bi-monthly and it had a theme. And 130 pages. And any unsold copies, they would get 2 of those and bind them inside a hardcover and put them out a few months later as a special 260-page comic. And they advertised that it had 40 stories inside. So it was
Marvel Special Edition was the tabloid side ones here. I see that they've got Star Wars 1 and 2, Special Edition, Empire Straight. So they have tabloid movie ones, but they were Marvel Special Edition. Marvel Super Special was the magazine side ones. The Battlestar Galactica, I think I have that one over there.
We also had something very weird with leftover Marvels from Brazil. Even the Brazilians would send us their leftovers. But even so, even then they would not guarantee they would sell all the leftovers here. So, in 1986, the Portuguese distributor packaged 3 random Marvel comics, each of them 80 pages, in a hardcover volume. And for some strange reason, and I don't know how they did this, but they put the cover to the Futurians graphic novel on it instead of Marvel characters. And I don't know where they got the art, because they never published. Editora Abril never published the Futurians graphic novel, and I don't know who even in Portugal would know what they were, let alone how to get a graphic novel. And I spent my entire youth trying to figure out what the hell those characters were.
Here's something interesting. There's an other publishers section here for other tabloid size stuff, which I didn't know this existed. September. There's 2 issues of a tabloid one called Sojourn, number 1 and 2, anthology series edited by Joe Kubert, published by White Cliffs Publishing Company. I guess Joe Kubert had a little sideline here. Oh, the first issue featuring Joe Kubert, Dick Giordano, Doug Wildley, John Severin, Sergio Aragonés, Lee Elias, Steve Bissett. Anthology series edited by Joe Kubert. I've never seen or heard of those.
Not at all. That's a good roundup.
Yeah. And there was also, I didn't realize it, Captain Canuck number 4 came out at tabloid size. 1975, limited edition of 300.
There are only 2 issues of Sojourn.
Yeah, only 2 issues. But I don't think I've ever heard of that one. But they got other stuff that's comic strip reprints here from Modern Promotions, whoever they are. Lil Iodine, Mandrake the Magician, Popeye, Beetle Bailey, Blondie, Flash Gordon, Henry, and the Katzenjammer Kids. All from 72. Yeah, it's a pretty cool book I didn't know was on my shelf. Magazine. Amazing what you can find on your own shelf.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I have seen that piece, Alex Ross piece at it's a wraparound.
Now that you mentioned it, I think I've seen this piece too.
Yeah.
Just don't remember it from this cover.
I think I have that issue. I have to look.
Let's see if it tells us anything about.
So that's that one issue. Back issue magazine is oversized and with the theme of the issue. Right,
is tabloid comics, so it's tabloid side. So I have it in with my with my Treasury editions and forgot. Oh, this was I guess I don't have a copy of it. I see. This was what I was thinking of, the Alex Ross Fantastic Four, tabloid one.
Yeah,
I must have not saved a copy of it because I remember when they were all over Marvel.
I need to go on their site and, no pun intended, look at back issues of their magazine to see like this, because they have focus on certain whatevers, right? So
in the early 2000s, I used to get it regularly, but then I somehow just stopped.
Yeah,
probably because I have such a they take up so much space after a while. It's kind of like, I'd rather have comic books taking up.
Right, yeah, and they'll give you might have the completest attitude that we all have. Like once you have one, you're like want to keep buying it. But I have a handful. I may have one or two of. Oh my God, what is the series of books where they spotlight an artist in each book? Modern Masters.
Oh, okay.
I have a couple of them. I have like Kevin McGuire at maybe.
Yeah, I think I have the Mike Marengo one and probably the George Perez one.
Mm-hmm. I've been meaning to. The only Perez collection on my shelf is I on eBay picked up the original Judas Contract, like the actual trade paperback, the first one that DC did of the Titan stuff back in the late '80s. But I want to get some of the Wonder Woman stuff because I did have that and I liked it a lot.
Here's a random Venomized ad from 2018.
Oh, neat!
But what is it? What do you mean ad? What is it?
It's probably something I got at the local comic shop.
Oh, it's like a
freebie giveaway from. Not that I'd ever buy the comic or read it, but it's cool. So I just got it and stuck it in with the other stuff.
On camera, it looks super glossy. Let me tell you,
it's like definitely super glossy. Colin Bunn and Ivan Coelho, Coello.
I don't know if I've ever seen a fold out thing. I've seen that for movies.
Oh, cover by Nick Bradshaw. So this is a Nick Bradshaw drawing.
What would you consider? It's like I've seen this for like movies, but not for a long time. Like a promotional, just kind of fold out.
A lobby card? I don't know.
Kind of. I've never,
stuck it up at the shelf. I probably haven't looked at it since 2018, but it's neat.
I love promotional. I guess it'd be ephemera. It might be the name for it, right?
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I got
a bunch of it lying around. Like sometimes if they're giving it away at the comic shop, I have.
When I used to go to movie premieres, they would give out
a
card that had stuff like that. I had a lot of them.
Yeah.
I have a complete set of the multicolored Green Lantern rings
from
that they gave out.
Blackest Night.
Yeah, whenever that was coming out, when they gave them out, they were supposed to give them out to people who bought the comics. But my LCS Roy is just like, here, you want some of these? Take them.
I have
Orange is the
Because I'm there every week. So.
Yeah, I just happen to have the orange one out.
orange is the color of avarice in the Green Lantern spectrum.
I must collect it all. That's why.
And along the same
That's right.
lines,
I
here's a
have
Legion-
Oh, it's a Legion flight
Legion
ring.
flight
That's great.
ring.
I
You
like
have
one of
the,
those.
flash
I
one as
have
well?
a flash ring.
Oh, the costume pops out of it.
I've got 1, 2.
Not mine.
But
Mine
that's
won't
what it
work
is,
with the
though, right?
Raven.
It's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be awesome if I could.
Yeah.
If I could pack,
Actually,
pack
it
some
worked.
clothes in there.
Actually functional. But the first, I don't know if it was a lobby card, whatever you call that fold out kind of cardboard thing like that. It was my first show I ever went to, Creation Convention, Thanksgiving '86. That's when Star Trek 4 was coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
The voyage home, and they have you walk in and they have like tables of giveaways. I had one of those. I lost over the years somehow, so I reacquired off of eBay not too long ago for 10, 12 bucks, nothing. But on that table, I remember there was, you guys might have it, that Marvel 25th pin. It was 25 with Spider-Man in front. It was just a little like plastic pin
The
that they would
25th
give away. I
anniversary.
think they're produced probably in the millions. They're probably giving away in comic shops and like so.
Yeah.
You know, I still have it though.
Yeah,
Just
I have one
reminded
of
me.
those. I have that. I have 30th anniversary pin
Mm-hmm.
for Spider-Man, the square pins. Excuse me. Yeah, I have a lot of those
yeah.
ephemeras and collectible pins.
Love all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have got a Keep on
Keep on
Trucking
trucking.
Robert Drum pin, which was from Flo Steinberg's memorial. They had at her memorial at the Society of Illustrators, they had a table of stuff from her apartment where they were like, I don't know who gathered it all up. We're like, take something, take a piece home with you. Whatever you want. This is all from Flo's apartment. Just ephemera she had from over the years.
Mhm.
And this Keep on Trucking pin came from there.
It's I with Flo, like I knew her the second time I was at Marvel, and she was so sweet. Everyone loved Flo, right? But I did not know this whole history she had in independent comics during late 60s and 70s and
Big Apple Comics.
Yeah.
I had no idea. In fact, I don't even think I knew that her history was early Stan Lee back in the day until later on when I was at Marvel in the mid 2000s. Then I knew, but that's amazing. So when you show me that pin, that's from
Robert
Crumb, from the Crumb stuff, right? But like she was maybe stuff she did was sort of like she was publishing stuff kind of like that.
Yeah, she was publishing underground stuff like that. Big Apple Comics, Big Apple Experience. Is that the name? I forget.
And where would you go when this stuff was out in the 70s, maybe?
Yeah.
So you'd go down to, I'm making this up and kind of romanticizing. You go down to Greenwich Village, maybe, and that's where you'd find. Where would you buy this stuff? Where would you
in a head shop? All underground.
Got it.
There used to be places called head shops where they specialized in drug paraphernalia. You could not sell drugs, but you could sell pipes. And there was a whole distribution network that went to it.
And High Times Magazine.
High Times Magazine, all
yeah.
the accoutrements that went with the hippie lifestyle.
And usually to find them in New York, they were usually the store right next to a poster store. So there'll always be
Right.
poster stores all over the village.
First saw one because by the late 70s, when I was 10 to 15, they outlawed them. That's why underground comics died, because they outlawed head shops.
Oh, interesting. I mean, I had heard, the term head shop probably like in the 80s, right? That's when I first heard the term. And head means, it's a drug term. What is it? It means like
get out of your head, man. Just
got it.
Go on a head trip.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I always thought it was connected to being called a pothead.
Got it. Right. Okay.
That's where in my young mind, connected the dots. Oh, it must mean that.
When did Flo return to Marvel after?
Early 90s.
Yeah. And she was working as like a proofreader and all that. Yeah. Who's under? That's a head shop being busted right now.
Yeah, there was still like there used to be a head shop near Marvel. Like there was still some around somehow.
Mhm.
Like in Midtown Manhattan, there was a head shop. I used to go there and get foreign magazines. I used to get the French edition of Photo magazine and other things. They had French photo magazines and stuff like that. People used to call a cool druggie a head. Okay. Sleepy is just old enough to be around when head shops were still open, I think. Because he's a couple years older than me.
I need to. Is there any collections of that stuff that Flo is publishing of like the Big Apple comic? Like, there's got to be some?
She only put out one actual comic, I think.
I only
really?
knew the one comic.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if she helped Woody get out his stuff or not.
Mm-hmm.
But she was dating Wally Wood in the 60s, I think.
Really? Did they meet via Marvel stuff?
I guess so. Yeah. That's just at least what I've heard.
That's
but
great. Did Flo have any? I don't want to get it too. Did she have family and stuff, or was she just?
I think so.
Yeah, that's why her stuff
I
was.
think she had a sister. I think that's where the stuff came from.
Right.
Okay.
But it's been forever since I have like one of the magazines, Alter Ego. I think did a whole article, did a whole book on Flo, but I haven't read the whole.
She didn't want anybody to visit her in the hospital when she was sick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Larry was the only one seeing her.
She would not did not want to see. Julio wanted to go see her because Julio was very close with her.
Mm-hmm. Alter Ego, that's another magazine, right?
Right. That's the Roy Thomas run one.
Okay, what is their that versus back issue? Alter Ego is about.
Alter Ego is Golden Age. Back issue is Bronze Age.
Okay.
All right. Well, on that note, we should wrap it up for the night and let Paolo get to bed.
All right.
Yeah. He's falling asleep on us. Yeah. So everybody have a good night out there. Hold
Take care. Have a great weekend.
Printings of underground comics and head shops in the late 70s. Ah, okay. Well, later printings. Yeah, I don't know the exact year they outlawed them, but I never saw any in my childhood in the late 70s. But why would I? I was 12.
Right.
To 14 in the late 70s. Paolo really needs sleep. All right.
Occasionally I do.
You guys have a good night out there, and we'll catch you next time.
Take care, everybody.